You open your eyes fully, and the room presents itself in shades of grey and charcoal, the only light seeping through a high narrow slit of a window that looks east, where the sky has begun to think about dawn but is not yet committed to it. You know this hour intimately. It is the hour when the world feels suspended between one thing and another, the hour when the desert is at its coolest, and the stones of the outpost still hold the memory of nighttime. You push back the cloak that covers you, the wool heavy and slightly scratchy against your bare shoulders, and you sit up slowly, feeling the subtle ache in your lower back from lying on the mat, the way your muscles loosen as you straighten your spine. Your feet find the packed earth floor, which is smooth and cool and faintly gritty under your soles, worn to a hard polish by the daily traffic of the garrison. You rise without hurry, standing upright in the low room, and for a moment you simply stand there, letting your body find its balance, letting the last cobwebs of sleep drift away. The air inside the barracks is close but not unpleasant, holding the collective warmth of sleeping men and the faint tang of the oil lamp that burned earlier in the night and has long since been extinguished. You walk the few steps to the clay basin that rests on a low wooden stand near the doorway, your bare feet silent on the earth. The basin is a simple, wide bowl, unglazed and reddish-brown, and it holds water that was poured there the evening before, water drawn from the deep well in the courtyard and carried up in a leather bucket. You dip both hands into it, and the water is cool, shockingly cool against your skin, a gift from the underground darkness. You lift cupped palms to your face, and the water streams down your cheeks, your closed eyes, the bridge of your nose, tracing the lines of your jaw and dripping back into the basin with small plinking sounds that seem loud in the hush. You do this twice more, each time feeling the last remnants of drowsiness dissolve in the coolness until you are awake and present and ready. From a wooden peg driven into the wall, you take your linen cloth and dry your face and hands, the fabric rough and absorbent and smelling of sun and wind. Then you dress, beginning with the simple linen kilt that is your daily uniform, a rectangle of cream-colored fabric that you wrap around your waist and secure with a tucked fold at the hip, the material soft from many washings and slightly frayed at the hem. It falls to just above your knees, and the feel of it is so familiar that your hands perform the motions without your mind needing to direct them. Over your head you drape a length of light cloth, the Neme's headdress that you wear on duty, its stripes faint now but still visible, and you arrange the folds so that the fabric covers your head and neck and can be pulled forward to shade your face when the sun climbs higher. The linen rests against your forehead with a gentle pressure, and you tuck the ends loosely behind your ears. You step into your sandals, which are made of woven papyrus reeds and leather, the soles shaped by your own feet over many miles of walking. You bend to tighten the leather thong that passes between your toes and around your ankle, the movement practiced and smooth. The sandals feel like a second skin, flexible and light, and they make a soft brushing sound when you walk, a whisper of reed against earth. From the rack along the wall you take your spear, the shaft of seasoned acacia wood polished to a dark gleam by the oils of your hands, and you test its weight, balancing it across your palm for a moment before letting it rest in the natural hollow of your shoulder. The bronze spearhead is leaf-shaped and has been sharpened recently enough that its edge catches the faintest glimmer from the window slit, a cold gleam in the grey light. Next you take your shield, a small rectangular shield made of cowhide stretched over a wooden frame, and you slip your left arm through the leather loop on the inner side, settling the shield against your forearm where it belongs. The hide is stiff and slightly curved, its surface marked with the faint outlines of old scratches that tell no stories worth remembering. Now you are ready, and you walk out of the barracks into the pre-dawn air. The courtyard is a wide open space enclosed by the four walls of the outpost, its floor packed earth swept clean each evening by the youngest recruits. A few storage jars as tall as a man's waist stand against the north wall, their clay sides sweating slightly in the cool air, and a wooden lean-to shelters a stack of fodder for the 2 donkeys that carry water up from the distant well when the courtyard reserves run low. Everything is quiet, so quiet that the silence feels like a physical presence, a soft weight pressing on your eardrums. The sky overhead has shifted now from charcoal to a deep luminous blue, and a few last stars hang on in the west, pale and hesitant. The air tastes dry and clean, with no moisture except the faint hint of well water and the dust that rises invisibly from the ground with every step. You cross the courtyard, passing the small shrine set into the eastern wall, a niche containing a carved wooden figure of a protective deity whose name you murmur without thinking, a habit worn smooth by repetition. The scent of old incense clings to the niche, a hint of resin and something sweetly smoky. You do not stop, but your pace slows for a heartbeat, an acknowledgement as automatic as breathing. Then you reach the base of the steps that lead up to the wall walk, a flight of 15 packed earth stairs reinforced with mud brick risers, their edges rounded and dipped in the center from the passage of countless sandals. You climb them one at a time, your spear held upright, the butt end tapping softly on each step, a dull thud that matches the rhythm of your ascent. At the top of the stairs you step onto the wall walk, a broad platform of mud brick that runs the entire perimeter of the outpost, wide enough for 2 men to pass each other without brushing shoulders. The parapet rises to waist height on the outer edge, its surface weathered into a rough texture by wind and sand, and you place your shield against it as you look out for the first time today at the desert. The desert at this hour is a study in softness and suggestion. The dunes are not yet golden, but a muted greyish tan, and the shadows in their hollows are lavender and charcoal, retreating slowly as the light grows. Far to the east, where the rim of the world is a clean line between sand and sky, a thin band of pale orange has appeared, so faint it might be a trick of the eye, and you know that the sun is gathering itself just below that line. You walk along the wall toward the northeast corner, where the watch post is marked by a slightly raised platform and a wooden sunshade that resembles a lean-to but open on all sides. A figure stands there already, a silhouette against the brightening sky, leaning on his own spear with a stillness that you recognize because you have worn that same stillness yourself. He hears your approach, the soft brush of your sandals on the brick, and he turns his head just enough to acknowledge you. You recognize him as Mena, a quiet man from the southern Nome, with a face shaped by years of outdoor living and eyes that always seem to be looking at something just beyond the visible. He says nothing, and you say nothing, and that is the entire greeting. You come to stand beside him, and for a few moments you both face the desert together, the silence comfortable and heavy. The light continues to change, the band of orange widening and softening into peach, then rose, and the stars that were still visible moments ago have vanished completely, absorbed into the blue. Mena shifts his weight, lifts his spear from the parapet, and gives a small nod that means the watch is now yours. He does not hurry. He checks the position of the water skin hanging from a peg, makes sure the small bronze gong that serves as an alarm is in its proper place, and then he turns and walks back along the wall toward the steps, his footsteps receding until they merge with the general quiet. You are alone now on the wall, and you settle into your place. You rest the butt of your spear on the brick surface and lean the shaft against the hollow of your shoulder, finding the balance point that allows you to stand for hours without strain. Your shield arm hangs at your side, the leather loop snug around your forearm, and you tilt your head slightly to feel the first faint warmth of the sun as its upper edge at last breaks free of the horizon. The light spills across the sand in a sudden rush, turning the grey dunes to gold and amber, and the temperature begins its slow climb immediately, though for now the air is still pleasant, still touched by the coolness of the night. Below you, the outpost begins to wake. You hear the first sounds drift up from the courtyard, the creak of the wooden door to the barracks, a brief exchange of low voices, the splash of water being poured from one vessel to another. Someone rakes the embers of the overnight fire and feeds it with a handful of dried dung, and a thin ribbon of smoke rises, carrying the smell of burning that is sharp and clean. The donkeys stir in their corner, one of them letting out a low bray that echoes off the walls and fades into the empty air beyond. These are the sounds of life, small and ordinary, and you listen to them without focusing, letting them become a kind of background music that underscores the great silence of the desert. You scan the eastern horizon out of long-trained habit, though in all the months you have stood this watch, you have never seen anything more threatening than a distant dust devil or a line of gazelles moving like shadows across the sand. The view is eternal and unchanging, the low ridge to the north that resembles the spine of a sleeping animal, the scatter of dark stones to the south where the ground is harder and more rocky, and directly ahead the great sea of dunes rolling away into an unimaginable distance. The sand is not uniform. It has subtle variations in color, pale beige here, deeper ochre there, and the wind has sculpted it into ripples and waves and sharp crests that catch the light on one side while the other remains in shadow. Nothing moves. Nothing has ever moved. The stillness is so complete that it presses against your eyes like a held breath. Time passes in the way. Time always passes on the wall, which is to say it stretches and slows until each minute feels like a small eternity. You shift your weight from your left foot to your right, feeling the slight flex of the sandal straps, the way the papyrus sole molds to the contours of the brick. Your hand on the spear shaft registers the smoothness of the wood, the grain that runs in long, uninterrupted lines, the warmth that is gradually replacing the coolness as the sun begins to heat the air. The headcloth rests lightly on your head, and you adjust it with your free hand, tugging the edge forward to shade your forehead, the fabric sliding across your skin with a whisper. A bird crosses the sky, a small brown shape that you cannot identify, flying low and fast from north to south. It makes no sound, its wings beating in swift pulses that carry it out of sight in a few heartbeats, leaving behind only the empty blue. You watch it go without any particular thought, the way you might watch a leaf float on the surface of the river, and then your gaze returns to the horizon, which remains exactly as it was. There is a comfort in this sameness, a deep relief in knowing that nothing will demand your attention, that the watch will continue hour after hour with no interruption, that your only task is to be here and to breathe and to exist in the stillness. Below, the morning routine unfolds with a quiet predictability. You hear the quartermaster, a man named Hurry, whose voice is a low rumble like distant thunder, checking the stores against his potsherd tally. He counts jars of emmer wheat and sealed waterskins, his murmur rising and falling in a rhythm that is almost a chant. Somewhere the captain walks his own circuit, his sandals making a firmer, more deliberate sound on the packed earth, and you picture him pausing to inspect the condition of the outer wall, running his hand over the brickwork to check for cracks that the dry heat might have widened. You do not turn to look. You've seen it all before, and the sounds alone are enough to paint the picture in your mind. The sun climbs higher, and the shadows inside the courtyard shrink against the western wall, pulling back like a tide retreating. On the parapet, the shadow cast by the sunshade is now a sharp-edged rectangle of darkness, and you step into it, grateful for the slight difference in temperature. The spear shaft remains in your hand, and you notice a tiny splinter near the base, a flake of wood that has lifted just enough to catch on your palm. You pick at it absently with your thumbnail, smoothing it down until it lies flat again, and you blow the dust from your fingers and watch it scatter into the air and disappear. A fly buzzes near your ear, a low, persistent drone that circles once, twice, then drifts away across the parapet. You follow its flight without moving your head, and you see it land on the rim of the small bronze gong, its body a dark speck against the dull metal. It rests there for a moment, cleaning its front legs with a busy motion, and then it lifts off and vanishes into the greater brightness of the day. The gong remains silent, as it has always remained silent, and you are glad of that. The heat begins to build in earnest now, a steady accumulation that you feel first on your shoulders and the back of your neck, where the linen cloth cannot quite reach. The air loses the last of its morning freshness and takes on a dry, baked quality, the smell of dust and warm brick, and the faint mineral tang of the desert beyond. You reach for the water skin hanging from its peg beside the gong, uncork it with a twist of your fingers, and take a measured sip. The water is no longer cool. It is warm to the temperature of the air, and it tastes slightly of leather, and of the clay jar it was stored in, an earthy flavor that you have come to associate with thirst and its satisfaction. You swallow slowly, letting the water moisten your throat, then recork the skin and return it to its place. A voice rises from below, calling someone's name, and footsteps hurry across the courtyard in response. You do not strain to listen. The words are muffled by distance and the walls, and they do not concern you. You are a part of the outpost, but also apart from it, suspended on your high perch where the only company is the sun and the sand and the long, slow breath of the desert wind that has just now begun to stir, a breeze so faint it barely moves the edge of your headcloth. It comes from the north, and it carries no scent, only a slight coolness that is already fading as the day asserts itself. You think, without intending to, of the village where you grew up, a place of green fields and irrigation canals, and the constant sound of water moving through narrow channels. You remember the feeling of mud between your toes when you helped plant the emmer, the way the stalks grew tall and rustled in the wind like a whispered conversation. You remember the smell of fresh bread baking in the communal oven and the sound of your mother humming a tune that you can no longer quite recall. These memories surface gently, without urgency, like bubbles rising through water, and you let them drift past without grasping at them. They are not sad memories, nor are they happy, they simply are, a part of the long tapestry of your mind that unrolls in the quiet hours of the watch. You blink, and the desert is still there, unchanged. The sun is higher now, its disk fully clear of the horizon and climbing into a pale sky that has bleached from blue to a whitish yellow near the center. The heat haze is beginning to shimmer over the distant dunes, a trembling distortion that makes the sand seem to ripple and flow like water. You watch it without focusing, your eyes relaxed, and the shimmer becomes a kind of moving meditation, a visual drone that soothes the mind into a state of calm emptiness. Your breathing slows, deepens, and you are aware of the rise and fall of your chest under the linen, the steady beat of your heart that has been with you since before you were born and will continue long after this watch is over. The wall beneath your feet feels solid and permanent, and you lean your hip against the parapet, letting the brick take some of your weight. The rough texture presses into your skin through the linen kilt, a grounding sensation that anchors you to the present moment. You are a soldier of the Pharaoh's garrison, stationed at a remote outpost on the eastern border, and your duty is to stand here and watch, to be the eyes that see nothing, to fill the hours with your presence so that the outpost remains guarded and the sands remain empty. It is a simple duty, and you fulfill it without complaint, without any strong feeling at all, simply being what you are and doing what you do. A faint sound reaches you, the distant call of a bird far out over the desert, a single note repeated 3 times and then silence. It might be a lark, or it might be something else. You do not know the names of the desert birds, only that they pass through sometimes, small and brown and fleeting. You turn your head slowly, scanning the sky, but there is nothing there except the vast blue dome and the pale disk of the sun. The sound is already gone, swallowed by the immensity, and you return your gaze to the horizon, which has not altered in any measurable way. The morning stretches on, and you settle deeper into the rhythm of the watch, a rhythm that is not marked by any clock but by the slow movement of the shadow at your feet, which is creeping incrementally eastward as the sun travels west. You notice the way the shadow of the sunshade has shifted, its edge now touching the base of the gong, and you know that an hour has passed, perhaps more. You do not count the hours. Counting would make them longer. Instead, you let them flow around you like the river you remember, smooth and unhurried, carrying you along without effort. The spear remains against your shoulder, and you shift it slightly, moving the point of contact to a new spot where the wood will not press a crease into your skin. Your arm is not tired, not yet. You have developed a kind of endurance that is as much mental as physical, a capacity for stillness that you did not possess when you first arrived at the outpost. You remember those early days, the restlessness that used to plague you, the urge to pace and fidget, and how the captain had told you in his quiet way that standing still was a skill like any other, that it could be learned and perfected. You have learned it, you think. You have learned to let your thoughts slow down until they are barely moving, to let your senses open without grasping, to become a part of the wall itself. Another soldier appears at the base of the steps, this one carrying a small basket. He climbs up and walks toward you with the slow, confident gait of someone who has done this 1,000 times. He is the relief for the morning meal, though you realize you have not been keeping track and did not know it was time. He hands you the basket and you take it, feeling the warmth of fresh flatbread through the woven palm leaves. He takes up a position a few paces away, and you understand that you are to go down and eat. You do not argue, you are not hungry yet, but you know the value of routine, the way meals mark the day and give it structure. You hand him the spear and shield, transferring the weight with a practiced ease, and then you descend the stairs one step at a time, your legs moving with a stiffness that is not unpleasant, the muscles stretching and warming as you go. In the courtyard, you find a spot in the shade of the western wall and sit on an upturned storage jar that has become an unofficial bench. You unwrap the basket and take out the flatbread, which is still slightly warm, and a small lump of hard cheese wrapped in a fig leaf. You eat slowly, tearing off pieces of bread and chewing them thoroughly, letting the mild, nutty flavor fill your mouth. The cheese is salty and crumbly, and you alternate bites of bread and cheese with sips of water from the communal jar that stands in the shade. Around you, other soldiers are doing the same, scattered across the courtyard in small groups or alone, their conversations low and intermittent. Nobody speaks to you, and you speak to nobody, and this is not rudeness, but simply the way things are. A mutual understanding that silence is as valuable as speech. You finish your meal and brush the crumbs from your kilt, watching them fall to the earth where a few sparrows will find them later. You clean your hands with a handful of sand, rubbing them together until the grit absorbs the oil from the cheese, then brushing the sand away. You feel refreshed, though the day is growing hotter, and you climb the steps again to resume your watch. The soldier who relieved you hands back the spear and shield without a word, and you settle once more into your place, facing the desert, the morning now stretching toward its midpoint, the shadows small and sharp, the sand a vast golden stillness that asks nothing of you and promises nothing except its own eternal presence. The world has settled into a pale gold stillness by the time you resume your place on the wall, the sun now fully risen and the last traces of dawn absorbed into the greater light of morning. You stand with your spear resting against your shoulder, the shaft a familiar line of warmth that runs from your palm down to the butt, planted on the brick. Your shield hangs from your forearm, its leather loop at comfortable pressure, and you tilt your head back just enough to feel the cloth of your headdress shift against your neck, the fabric soft from use and slightly warm already from the climbing sun. The eastern horizon which you face is no longer a sharp line between sand and sky, but a gentle blending of pale beige and washed-out blue, a boundary that seems to breathe and waver as the heat begins its slow daily accumulation. You let your eyes move across that horizon without hurry, tracing the contours of dunes that you know as well as the lines on your own palm, each rise and fall a shape etched into your memory through months of repetition. The light at this hour is still gentle enough that you can look out over the desert without squinting, and you take in the expanse with a quiet attention that asks for nothing in return. The sand nearest the outpost is a dull tan, packed harder where the wind has swept it against the base of the wall, and further out it becomes softer, rising into long slopes that catch the sun on their eastern faces, while their western sides hold shadows of lavender and dove-grey. The dune crests are sharp as knife edges in places, and the wind has carved tiny ripple patterns into the slopes, patterns that repeat themselves endlessly, like the halls of a fingerprint seen under a close gaze. You notice these things because there is nothing else to notice, and the act of noticing is a way of filling the hours, a gentle occupation that requires no effort and produces no result. A small flock of birds appears low on the horizon, dark specks that rise and dip in a fluid line, moving from north to south with a purpose you cannot guess. They are too far away for you to hear any sound they might make, and they cross your field of view in a long minute of silent flight, disappearing finally behind the low ridge that marks the northern boundary of your visible world. The ridge itself is a featureless hump of darker rock and compacted sand, shaped by centuries of wind into a smooth curve that reminds you, if you let it, of the back of a sleeping hippopotamus, half submerged in the river, though the river is very far away and the thought drifts off before it can fully form. You adjust your grip on the spear, sliding your hand a finger's width up the shaft, and the wood under your palm is smooth and warm, a sensation so familiar it barely registers except as a quiet anchor in the present. Time stretches in the way time always stretches on the wall, and you feel your breathing settle into a slow rhythm that matches the unhurried pulse of the desert. You breathe in, and the air is dry and slightly dusty, carrying a faint taste of minerals that reminds you of the smell of old stone, the kind of stone you might find in a dry wadi where water has not flowed for 1,000 years. You breathe out, and the sound of your exhalation is so soft it merges with the whisper of the light breeze that has begun to stir from the east. A breeze that barely moves the edge of your headcloth, but does carry a faint coolness that feels like a distant memory of the night. The breeze passes, and the stillness returns, and you shift your weight from your right foot to your left, feeling the slight give of the sandal straps, the way the papyrus sole conforms to the uneven surface of the mud brick beneath you. Your eyes continue their slow scan, moving from the far right where the ridge slopes down into a shallow depression filled with darker gravel, across the central expanse of clean sand that seems to shimmer slightly as the heat begins to build, and onto the left, where a scatter of dark stones breaks the monotony, each stone casting a tiny shadow that makes it stand out against the pale ground. You have looked at these stones many times before, and you have sometimes imagined that they might be the remains of something ancient, a road or a wall, but you know they are just stones, random and meaningless, scattered by some long-ago flood when the desert was not yet a desert. The thought is a quiet one, without curiosity, and it fades as you move your gaze onward, back to the horizon that continues to offer nothing but its own blank presence. The spear shaft is warm now from the sun and from your hand, and you feel the grain of the wood beneath your fingertips, the slight rise and fall of the annual rings that mark the years the acacia tree spent growing by the river before it was cut and shaped and given to you. You remember the day the quartermaster handed it to you, a newly issued weapon with a sharp bronze head that gleamed like water, and you remember how heavy it felt then, how your arm ached after the first few watches. Now it is a part of your body, an extension of your arm and shoulder, and you no longer notice its weight except in the way it balances you, a counterweight to the stillness. You let your thumb trace a small knot in the wood, a dark eye-shaped wall that you have touched 1,000 times, and the motion is soothing, a tiny repetitive gesture that occupies a corner of your mind while the rest of you drifts. The desert begins to shimmer as the sun climbs higher and the heat haze makes the distant dunes ripple and dance, a slow liquid motion that is not real movement, but only the bending of light through layers of warming air. You watch this shimmer without focusing, your eyes relaxed, and the effect is like looking through the surface of a shallow pond into water that is just beginning to stir. The horizon loses its sharpness, and the far dunes seem to float, unmoored from the earth, their crests dissolving into a silver-white glare that hurts if you look too long. So you let your gaze drop to the middle distance, where the sand is a steady ochre and the heat waves are less pronounced. A lizard scuttles along the top of the parapet, a pale creature with dark spots along its back, and it pauses to tilt its head and regard you with one black, unblinking eye, before darting into a crack between the bricks, its tail disappearing last with a tiny flick. You watch the crack for a moment, but nothing else emerges, and you return your attention to the sands. Your mind, left to its own devices, begins to drift along pathways worn smooth by many previous watches. It drifts not toward any concrete memory, but toward a general sense of greenness, a feeling of moisture and shade that stands in quiet contrast to the dryness all around you. You think of the river, the great Nile that you grew up beside, its waters brown and slow and full of life. You remember how the surface of the river looked in the early morning, smooth as oil, reflecting the palms and the mudbanks and the white erots standing motionless at the edge. You remember the sound of water lapping against the sides of a reed boat, a soft liquid sound that seemed to contain all the coolness in the world. These memories come not as pictures, but as sensations. The feel of mud squelching between your toes when you stepped into the shallows, the smell of wet earth and green growing things, the high sharp call of a kingfisher that always made you look up. You let these sensations wash over you, and they are pleasant in a distant way, like listening to a story about someone else's life. A slight noise behind you draws your attention back to the outpost, the creak of the wooden door to the barracks, the sound of a clay jar being set down on the packed earth, the murmur of two voices exchanging words too low to distinguish. You do not turn around, but you listen with the part of your mind that always remains alert to the small sounds of the garrison, cataloguing them without effort. The voices belong to the younger soldiers, boys really, who are assigned to sweep the courtyard and check the water stores, and you can tell by the rhythm of their speech that they are not speaking of anything urgent, just the slow, friendly talk of people who have spent many hours in each other's company and have exhausted all the interesting topics long ago. Their voices fade as they move to the far side of the courtyard, and the silence flows back in, a silence so deep it seems to have its own texture, smooth and heavy, like a length of unbleached linen draped over everything. You take another sip from the water skin, the leather warm against your lips, and the water tastes of the clay jar and the deep well, and the long journey it made from the underground darkness to this high, dry place. You swallow slowly, letting the moisture spread across your tongue and down your throat, and you feel a small cool bloom in your chest, a brief relief that is already fading by the time you hang the skin back on its peg. The sun is higher now, its heat a steady pressure on your shoulders and the top of your head, but the headcloth does its work and you are not uncomfortable, only aware of the warmth as you might be aware of a blanket on a cool night. You adjust the cloth again, pulling it forward an inch, and a tiny puff of dust rises from the fabric and drifts away on the breeze. The shadows have shrunk to small dark pools at the base of the wall and under the sunshade, and you step into the shade of the lean-to, feeling the immediate difference in temperature, a faint coolness that is mostly the absence of direct sun. You lean your hip against the parapet and let the wall take some of your weight, and you return your gaze to the eastern horizon, which is now a blazing line of white gold that makes you narrow your eyes. The shimmer is intensified, and the distant dunes are no longer distinct shapes but a single band of wavering light, the sand and sky merging into a haze that looks almost liquid, a mirage that promises water where there is none. You've seen mirages before, and they no longer hold any power over you. They are just another part of the desert, like the stones and the dust and the silence. A single column of dust rises far out on the plain, a thin brown thread that lifts and twists and then collapses, a dust devil born of the uneven heating of the sand. It lasts for perhaps a minute, spinning in place before the wind that created it dies and the dust settles back to the ground, leaving no trace. You watch it with the same calm attention you would give to a leaf falling from a tree, a small event that is over almost as soon as it begins, and when it is gone you do not remember it, except as a vague impression of movement in a world of stillness. Your hand on the spear shaft has grown used to the warmth, and you shift your grip slightly, feeling the smoothness under your fingers, the way the wood has been polished by time and touch to a dark sheen that catches the light when you move it. The bronze spearhead glints once, a brief flash of gold, and then it is dull again, a cold hard shape at the end of the warm wood. You think again of the river, and this time the thought is more specific. A particular bend in the river where the current slowed and formed a wide pool, a place where the village children used to swim on the hottest days. You can almost feel the cool water closing over your skin, the shock of it after the heat of the sun, the way your body would float without effort in the brown-green depths. You remember the sound of laughter echoing off the mud banks, the splash of a diving body, the scent of water weeds crushed underfoot. But the memory does not sharpen into anything painful or sharp. It remains gentle, a soft watercolor wash of feeling that overlays the present moment without disturbing it. You are not there. You are here, and here is the wall and the sand and the endless sky, and you are content to be exactly where you are, doing exactly what you are doing. A fly buzzes past your ear, a low drone that circles your head twice and then settles on the rim of your shield. You look down at it, a small dark shape on the pale leather, and it rubs its front legs together with a rapid busy motion that seems full of purpose, though you know it has no purpose at all. It stays there for a long moment, and then it lifts off and drifts away across the courtyard, and you follow its flight without moving your head until it disappears into the deeper shade of the lean-to roof. The shield remains on your arm, a steady weight that you have grown so accustomed to that you sometimes forget it is there, and you let your arm hang loose at your side, the leather creaking faintly as it shifts. The morning moves into its middle hours, and the heat becomes a constant presence, a dry blanket that wraps around you and muffles all sensation except the steady thud of your own heartbeat and the slow rhythm of your breathing. You close your eyes for a moment, just a moment, and behind your eyelids the world is a warm orange-red, the color of the sun shining through skin. You listen to the silence, which is not complete, but layered with tiny sounds. The faint rustle of the wind against the sunshade, the distant creak of the well rope, the soft murmur of someone sweeping the courtyard below. These sounds are so familiar that they have become a kind of silence themselves, a background hum that you no longer notice unless you consciously attend to it. You open your eyes, and the desert is still there, unchanged. The dunes still rolling away into the distance, the sky still a pale hazy blue, the sun still climbing its long slow arc. You shift your weight from your left foot to your right, a small adjustment that prevents any one muscle from growing stiff, and the motion is so practiced that it happens without thought. Your sandals make a soft brushing sound on the brick, and you feel the texture of the mud brick through the thin soles, the slight roughness of the surface that has been worn smooth in patches and left gritty in others. The wall beneath you is old, older than your time at the outpost, older perhaps than the captain's time, and has been repaired so many times that its surface is a patchwork of different shades of brown, some darker where new bricks were laid, some lighter where the sun has bleached them. You know this wall as you know your own body, and you could walk it in the dark without stumbling, each step placed exactly where it needs to be. The eastern horizon, which has been your companion all morning, continues to offer its blank face to the sky, and you continue to watch it with a patience that is not patience at all, but simply the absence of any need for something to happen. You are aware, in a distant way, that you are guarding something, that the outpost exists to watch for movements from the eastern lands. But that awareness is theoretical, a piece of knowledge that sits in your mind like a stone in a field, unmoving and unchanging. In all the months you have stood here, no movement has ever come from the east, no line of approaching figures, no dust cloud raised by marching feet. The desert has remained as empty as it is now, a vast, quiet sea of sand that asks only to be left alone. And you are content to leave it alone, to stand here and watch it with the same steady gaze you would give a sleeping animal, respectful and undemanding. The spear in your hand has grown warm to the point where you can no longer tell the difference between the temperature of the wood and the temperature of your skin. They have merged into a single sensation, a comfortable weight that feels like a part of you. You run your thumb along the shaft, and you feel the tiny groove where a stone once nicked the wood, a small scar that has been there since before the spear was issued to you. You wonder in a mild way how that nick got there. What careless soldier dropped the spear or let it fall against a rock? But the wondering has no urgency, and it fades into the general quiet of your thoughts. The groove is just there, a small imperfection that makes the spear more familiar, more yours. Another hour passes, or perhaps it is only a few minutes. You cannot tell, and you do not try to tell. The sun reaches a point where the shadow of the sunshade is a narrow strip directly beneath the wooden frame, and you know that it is nearing the midday hour, though the midday meal is still some time away. You feel a faint hunger, a gentle hollow sensation in your stomach that is not unpleasant, just a quiet reminder that you ate several hours ago and will eat again when the time comes. You think about the flatbread and the cheese and the onion that will be brought to you, and the thought is soothing, a promise of small comforts in a day made of small comforts. Your mouth waters slightly, and you swallow, tasting the last lingering trace of the water you drank earlier. A bird calls somewhere behind the outpost, a repetitive, three-note phrase that you have heard many times before, a sound that seems to say, "All is well, all is well, all is well," though you know the bird is only marking its territory or calling to a mate. The sound repeats 4 times, 5 times, and then it stops, and the silence rushes back in to fill the space it left. You turn your head slowly to the left, scanning the sky for the bird, but you cannot see it. It must be perched somewhere in the sparse scrub that grows on the western side of the outpost, a few thorny bushes that manage to survive on the scant moisture that collects there. You turn back to the east, and the desert has not changed, and you did not expect it to change. Your mind drifts again to the village, to the narrow lanes between the mud brick houses, the sound of donkeys braying in the early morning, the smell of bread baking in the communal ovens. You remember the way the light looked in the late afternoon, golden and slanting, catching the dust motes that floated in the air inside your family's house, turning them into tiny floating sparks. You remember the feel of the reed mat where you used to sleep, the way it smelled of river grass and sun, the way it creaked when you turned over in the night. These memories are soft and blurred at the edges, like old linen that has been washed so many times the fibers are beginning to thin, and they wrap around you now with a gentle warmth that has nothing to do with the sun. You let them come and go, neither holding on to them nor pushing them away, and they pass through your mind like the birds that crossed the horizon earlier, leaving no trace except a faint sense of having been there. You breathe in again, and the air tastes of dust and distance, a flavor so familiar you no longer notice it. You breathe out, and your shoulders drop a fraction, releasing a tension you had not been aware of holding. The spear remains at your side, the shield remains on your arm, the sun remains in the sky, and you remain on the wall, a single still point in the vast turning of the day. The eastern horizon shimmers and holds its silence, and you hold yours, and the morning watch continues in its slow, unbroken rhythm, carrying you forward into the heat of the day, without hurry or resistance. The sun climbs higher, and the morning softens into something heavier, the gentle gold of dawn giving way to a harsher brilliance that bleaches the sky to a pale whitish blue and presses down on the outpost like a wide, warm hand. You feel the change first on the back of your neck, where the edge of your headcloth does not quite reach, a patch of skin that begins to prickle with heat and then to glow, a slow burning that is not yet painful but promises to become uncomfortable if you do not adjust the fabric. You lift your free hand and tug the linen further back, draping it over the exposed skin, and the immediate relief is slight but welcome, the cloth creating a small pocket of shade that cools as your sweat begins to gather and evaporate. The sweat itself is a subtle thing at first, just a faint dampness at your hairline and in the hollow of your throat, but as the minutes accumulate, it traces slow paths down your temples and along the groove of your spine beneath the linen kilt, tiny rivers of moisture that feel cool for an instant, before the dry air wicks them away. The spear shaft in your hand has grown properly warm now, not just the surface warmth of your own grip, but a deeper heat soaked in from the sun, and you shift your hold slightly, moving your palm to a section that has been shaded by your body. The wood there is marginally cooler, and the difference is enough to notice, a small comfort that fades as the new section warms in turn. You rest the butt of the spear more firmly on the brick and let your arm hang loose, the shield still looped over your forearm with its leather strap, and you feel the weight of it as a steady pull that your muscles have long since learned to ignore. The cowhide surface of the shield is warm too, and when you glance down at it, you see a faint bloom of salt crystals forming along the edge where your sweat has dried, a thin white line that you could scrape off with a fingernail, but do not. The air itself has thickened with heat, losing the last crispness of morning and taking on a density that makes each breath feel slightly substantial, as though you're inhaling warm wool. It carries the dry mineral scent of the desert, a smell like old bones and sun-baked stone, and under that, the fainter smell of the mud brick wall itself, an earthy odor that rises as the bricks warm and release the moisture they absorbed during the night. You stand in the narrow shade of the reed lean-to, but the shade is shrinking as the sun moves toward its zenith, and soon you will have to step fully into the light or retreat down into the courtyard. For now, you remain where you are, watching the desert shimmer and dance beyond the parapet. The lizard that you saw earlier, or another very like it, reappears from a gap in the brickwork and scuttles onto the top of the wall. It is a small pale thing, the color of sand with a row of darker speckles along its back, and it moves in quick, jerky bursts, stopping between each burst to freeze utterly still, its tiny claws gripping the rough surface. You watch it without moving your head, just your eyes, tracking its progress, and it halts a handspan from your shield and does a series of rapid push-ups, bobbing its head up and down in a display that is meant for other lizards but seems, in the quiet, to be directed at the sun itself. The motion is oddly mesmerizing, a tiny pulse of life in the great stillness, and then the lizard darts away into another crack and is gone. The wall looks exactly as it did before, as though the creature had never been there. A sound rises from below, the measured tread of sandals on the packed earth of the courtyard, firmer than the shuffle of the younger soldiers, and you know without looking that it is the captain making his morning circuit. You have heard his footsteps so many times that you can identify them by their rhythm alone, a steady, unhurried pace that never varies. He climbs the steps to the wall walk, and you hear his breathing, slightly heavier from the climb, but still even, and then he is standing a few paces away, his own spear held loosely in one hand. He is a man of middle years named Neberman, with a face that the sun has turned to leather and eyes that are always slightly squinted, as though he is perpetually looking into a bright light. He wears the same simple kilt and headcloth as you do, though his headcloth has a thin stripe of blue that marks his rank, a stripe so faded by the sun it is barely visible. He does not speak immediately, and you do not speak either, the two of you standing together on the wall in a silence that is comfortable and familiar. He rests his spear against the parapet and looks out over the desert, his gaze moving slowly from north to south, and you know he is performing the same scan you have performed 100 times already today, the same scan he has performed every day of his command. After a while he turns his head slightly toward you and speaks in a low voice, the words emerging from deep in his chest. He mentions the grain tally, saying that the store of Emma is holding steady and that the new jars sealed last month are showing no signs of weevil. He mentions the water jars, noting that the level in the main storage jar has dropped to finger's width faster than usual, and that the younger soldiers should be reminded to draw from the well before the sun reaches its peak. His voice is a low rumble, a sound like stones rolling slowly in a riverbed, and you listen without needing to respond beyond a slight nod that he sees from the corner of his eye. He stays for a few more minutes, and in that time a small cloud passes across the sun, a wisp of white that provides a momentary dimming, and you both look up as the light softens and then brightens again. The captain says something about the condition of the outer wall, a patch of brick near the southwest corner that has crumbled slightly and will need to be repaired before the next season of winds, and then he lifts his spear from the parapet and turns to go. His footsteps retreat along the wall walk, down the steps and across the courtyard, and the silence flows back in behind him like water filling a footprint in mud. You are alone again, and the heat has become a degree more intense in the time he was there, the sun now nearly overhead, and the shadow of the lean-to reduced to a sliver that barely covers your feet. You reach for the water skin that hangs from its peg and uncork it, the motion automatic, and you take a measured sip. The water is no longer even faintly cool. It has absorbed the warmth of the air and the leather and tastes of both, a flat, earthy flavor that does little to refresh but does moisten your mouth and throat. You hold the water in your mouth for a moment before swallowing, letting it spread across your tongue, and then you take one more small sip and recork the skin. The level inside is still high enough that you do not need to worry, and you hang it back on the peg and wipe your lips with the back of your hand, feeling the faint grit of salt that has dried there. The heat haze over the desert is now a continuous shimmer, a trembling distortion that erases the sharp edges of the dunes and makes the entire landscape appear to be underwater. The far ridges ripple and waver, and in the deepest part of the haze there appears a phantom lake, a sheet of silver blue that looks exactly like water, but is only the sky reflected in the heated air. You have seen this mirage so many times that it no longer registers as anything but a feature of the day, as ordinary as the mud brick under your feet. Your mind knows it is not real, and your eyes have stopped trying to focus on it, so you let your gaze drift to the middle distance, where the sand is a steady ochre and the heat waves are less intense. You think about the water in the well below the courtyard, the deep, narrow shaft that goes down through layers of sand and rock to the dark underground pool that feeds the outpost. You imagine the water there, cool and silent and utterly black, resting in the earth's deep places where the sun has never reached. The image is soothing, a cool counterpoint to the heat that wraps around you, and you hold it in your mind for a while, picturing the smooth stone walls of the well and the faint drip of moisture that echoes up from the depths when the bucket is lowered. The young soldiers will be drawing water soon, heaving on the rope with their shoulders and arms, and the bucket will rise glistening and cold, and the water will be poured into the clay jars that stand in the shade of the north wall. You will drink that water later, and it will be cool on your tongue, and the thought is a small promise that makes the present heat more bearable. Your mind drifts from the well to the river, as it often does, tracing the long distance from this dry outpost back to the green floodplain where you grew up. You remember the feel of the inundation season, when the river rose and spilled over its banks and the fields became a shallow brown lake, the water warm and slow and full of silt. You remember wading through the flooded fields with your father, the water coming up to your knees, feeling the mud squelch under your feet and the tiny fish that darted away from your steps. The memory is so vivid that you can almost smell the river again, a rich organic smell of wet earth and rotting reeds, and the clean green scent of growing things, a smell so different from the dry mineral air you are breathing now that it seems to belong to another world. You shift your weight from your left foot to your right, and the sandals creak faintly, the papyrus fibers flexing. The heat has made the leather thongs soft and pliable, and you feel them stretch slightly as you move. Your feet are hot inside the sandals, the soles feeling the stored warmth of the brick through the thin layer of reed, and you think briefly about taking the sandals off and standing barefoot on the cooler bricks under the lean-to. But you do not do it. The sandals are part of your uniform, part of the watch, and you keep them on out of habit, even though no one would care if you removed them. The spear shaft in your hand has a small crack near the base, a hairline fissure that you notice now as your thumb passes over it. You look down and examine it without concern, seeing how the crack runs along the grain of the wood for the length of your little finger, not deep enough to weaken the shaft, but something to keep an eye on. You make a mental note to rub a little oil into it later, some of the linseed oil that the quartermaster keeps in a small jar for treating wood and leather, and then you forget about it as your gaze returns to the desert. Another hour passes, or perhaps it is less than an hour. The heat has a way of compressing and stretching time so that minutes feel like hours and hours feel like minutes, and you have long since stopped trying to measure them. The sun reaches its zenith and seems to hang there, a white disk directly overhead, and the shadows vanish almost entirely, leaving only a thin dark line at the very base of the walls. The outpost feels like a kiln, the mud brick radiating the heat it has absorbed all morning, and the air in the courtyard below shimmers as though a fire is burning somewhere just out of sight. The donkeys have retreated to the deepest shade they can find, standing with their heads low and their ears drooping, and the younger soldiers have stopped their chores and are sitting against the north wall with wet cloths draped over their heads. You remain on the wall because that is your duty, and you endure the heat with the same quiet patience you have cultivated over many months. You breathe slowly, in through your nose and out through your mouth, and you let your thoughts become very still, a pool of water unruffled by any wind. The desert before you is a white gold blaze, too bright to look at directly, and you keep your eyes half closed, your lashes filtering the glare. The silence is absolute now, even the small sounds of the outpost hushed by the weight of the midday heat, and the only thing you can hear is the faint rush of your own blood in your ears. A distant ocean that has always been there, just at the edge of perception. A single fly buzzes slowly past, its wing beats audible in the stillness, and you follow its meandering flight across the parapet and out over the desert, where it disappears into the shimmer. You wonder how far it will go, what it hopes to find out there in the empty sands, and the wondering is idle and without purpose, a small wisp of thought that dissipates almost immediately. The fly is gone, and you are still here, and the sun is still overhead, and the watch continues. The captain's words about the grain and the water jars drift back into your mind, and you consider them with the slowness of a mind that has nothing else to consider. The emigraine is stored in large clay jars sealed with mud and straw, and you picture them standing in the storeroom, rows of tall reddish vessels with their mouths covered and their sides sweating slightly in the heat. The grain inside is dry and hard, each kernel a tiny golden bead that will be ground into flour when it is needed, and you can almost taste the flatbread that will be made from it, the nutty flavor and the slightly chewy texture that you know so well. The water jars are larger, almost as tall as a man's waist, and they are lined up against the north wall where the shade lasts longest. Their clay sides cool to the touch even on the hottest days. You think about the young soldiers lowering the leather bucket into the well, the way the rope creaks on the wooden pulley, the splash that echoes up from the darkness when the bucket hits the water, and the slow, steady hauling that brings it back up, dripping and cold. These routines are the bones of the outpost, the structure that holds the days together, and you find comfort in their ordinariness. Your mouth has gone dry again, and you take another sip of water, the last from the skin, before you will need to refill it. The water is hot now, almost unpleasantly so, but it still serves its purpose, and you swallow it down and feel it settle in your stomach, a small warm weight. You hang the empty skin back on its peg and make a note to ask one of the younger soldiers to refill it when they next draw water, and then you return your attention to the desert, which has not changed in any way that matters. The afternoon is approaching, though it is not yet here, and you can feel the day beginning its slow pivot toward evening, a shift so gradual it is more a feeling than a measurable change. The light has a slightly different quality now, the white glare softening by the smallest degree, and the shadows, though still negligible, have begun to lengthen on the eastern side of the outpost. You know that the worst of the heat will soon be over, that the sun will begin its descent and the air will cool and the long slow evening will arrive with its amber light and its lengthening shadows. But for now the heat remains, a heavy blanket that wraps around you and muffles the world, and you stand in it, not fighting it, simply present, a still figure on a still wall in the middle of the vast quiet desert. Your eyes close for a moment, just a moment, and you let the warmth wash over you, feeling it in your bones and your blood. And when you open your eyes again, the world is exactly the same, and you're exactly where you were, and that is perfectly fine. The heat has settled into its midday weight, a thick, slow pressure that seems to press the air out of the courtyard and leave only a dense stillness behind when you hear the soft scuff of sandals on the steps at the far end of the walk. You do not turn your head, because there is no need. The rhythm of the footsteps is light and quick. Not the deliberate tread of the captain or the heavy shuffle of the older soldiers, but the step of a younger man, someone still growing into his own body. The sound approaches along the wall, and a moment later a figure appears at the edge of your vision, a soldier named Ipui, who has been at the outpost for only a few months and still carries the roundness of youth in his cheeks. He is holding a small basket woven from palm fronds, the kind used to carry meals from the courtyard kitchen up to the men on watch, and he holds it out to you with both hands, his face half hidden by the shadow of his own headcloth. You accept the basket with a nod that is both thanks and dismissal, and he returns the nod and turns away, his footsteps receding back along the wall and down the steps until they merge with the general quiet. You are alone again on the high platform, the spear still leaning against your shoulder, the shield still hanging from your arm, and now the basket rests in your free hand, its weight slight but solid, a small warm bundle that promises the midday meal. You step fully into the shade of the reed lean-to, where the air is a fraction cooler, and you lower yourself onto the single flat stone that serves as a seat, a piece of limestone worn smooth by the many watchkeepers who have sat here before you. The stone is warm but not hot, having been shaded all morning, and you settle onto it with a slow exhale, letting your back rest against the mud brick of the parapet. You set the spear aside, laying it carefully on the brick within arm's reach, and you unloop the shield from your forearm and prop it against the wall beside you, the leather facing outward and the wood frame resting on the stone. Your arm feels suddenly light without it, and you flex your fingers, feeling the blood move back into the small muscles of your hand. The basket sits in your lap, and you untie the simple knot of twisted palm fiber that holds it closed, pulling the loose ends apart with a patience that has no need to hurry. The fronds rustle softly, a dry papery sound, and the lid falls open to reveal a square of coarse linen folded over the contents. You lift the linen away, and the smell of the food rises to meet you, the mild nutty scent of flatbread, the salt tang of dried fish, and the faint sharpness of a small onion still in its papery skin. You take out the flatbread first, a round disc about the size of your two hands spread wide, its surface mottled with darker spots where it touched the hot clay of the oven. It is still faintly warm, the warmth of the baking having been preserved by the linen wrap and the basket, and you hold it in both hands for a moment, feeling the gentle heat seep into your palms. The texture is slightly rough on the outside and softer within, and when you tear off a small piece, the bread gives way with a quiet sigh, a tiny sound of separation that is swallowed immediately by the vast silence of the desert. You place the piece in your mouth and begin to chew, slowly, letting your teeth work the bread into a soft paste. The flavor is simple and clean: ground emmer wheat, water, a hint of salt, and underneath everything the faint earthy taste of the clay oven itself, a reminder of the fire that baked it. You chew and swallow, and the bread settles in your stomach like a small stone of warmth, and you tear off another piece and repeat the motion. The dried fish comes next, a fillet that has been split and salted and left in the sun until it is stiff as leather, its surface covered with a fine white bloom of salt crystals that glint in the dim light under the lean-to. You break off a small fragment, the fish snapping cleanly along its grain, and you put it in your mouth and let it soften on your tongue before you begin to chew. The salt dissolves first, a sharp burst of flavor that makes your mouth water, and then the fish itself releases its deeper taste, a concentrated essence of the river that is both rich and mild, a memory of water and reeds, and the cool mud of the river bottom. You chew it slowly, mixing it with the bread in your mouth, and the combination is satisfying in a way that is hard to name, a simple fulfillment of a simple need. You take another piece of fish and another piece of bread and you eat them together, your jaw working in a slow, steady rhythm that is almost meditative. The onion sits in the basket, a small brown blob with a thin, papery skin that crackles when you touch it. You pick it up and peel away the outer layer, revealing the glossy white flesh beneath, and the sharp, clean scent rises and pricks at your eyes just enough to make you blink. You break the onion apart with your fingers, separating the layers, and you take a piece and bite into it. The crunch is loud in the quiet, a small crisp sound that seems too large for the space, and the juice is sharp and sweet at the same time, cutting through the saltiness of the fish and the blandness of the bread. You chew the onion slowly, feeling its heat spread across your tongue, and then you take another bite of bread to mellow the flavor, and you continue in this way, alternating bites of bread and fish and onion, until the basket is empty and the linen cloth holds only a few scattered crumbs and a tiny fragment of onion skin. You gather the crumbs with a fingertip and brush them into your palm, and then you lean forward and scatter them over the outer edge of the parapet, where they fall onto the sand below and become instantly invisible. A sparrow may find them later, or an ant, or the wind may carry them away, and it does not matter which. You fold the linen cloth into a neat square and place it back in the basket, and you close the lid and retie the palm fiber knot, setting the basket aside to be taken down later. The meal is finished, and you feel a quiet fullness that is not heavy but comfortable, a sense of having been fed that spreads through your body and makes the heat of the day seem a little more bearable. You sit for a while longer on the warm limestone, not yet ready to stand and resume your full posture on the wall, and you let your gaze drift out over the desert. The heat haze is at its most intense now, a shimmering curtain that turns the distant dunes into a wavering mirage of silver and blue, and the horizon has dissolved entirely into the sky, so that there is no clear boundary between earth and air. The sand nearest the outpost is of pale gold, blindingly bright where the sun strikes it directly, and the shadows of the wall and the lean-to fall across it in sharp-edged rectangles of deep blue-gray. You watch the shimmer without focus in your eyes half closed against the glare, and the motion of the heated air is hypnotic, a slow liquid dance that seems to have no beginning and no end. Your mind empties of any coherent thought, and you simply look, not seeing anything in particular, letting the light and the heat and the silence wash over you in gentle waves. After a time, you become aware of the shield propped beside you, and you reach out and run a finger along its curved edge. The cowhide is warm and slightly rough, and the rim is bound with a strip of rawhide that has dried hard and dark over the years. You notice a tiny crack in the wood of the frame, just visible where the hide has pulled away slightly at one corner, a hairline fissure that is probably as old as the shield itself. You press your thumbnail into the crack, testing its depth, and you find that it is shallow, not a weakness, but simply a sign of age, a mark of the many years this shield has spent in the sun and the wind and the dry air of the desert. You make a mental note to mention it to the quartermaster, though you know he will only nod and say that all the shields have cracks and that they will hold for another season, and then you will both forget about it until the next time you notice it. You set the shield down again and turn your attention to the quiver that rests in the corner of the lean-to, a cylindrical container made of leather stretched over a wooden frame, its surface darkened by age and handling. The quiver holds a bundle of arrows, each one a straight shaft of reed tipped with a small bronze point and fletched with 3 feathers, from a goose or a duck. You do not need the arrows, you have never needed them, not once in all your months of the outpost, but they are kept here as part of the watch, a precaution against a threat that has never materialized. You reach over and lift the quiver, feeling its weight, and you draw out one arrow and examine it. The reed shaft is smooth and straight, the bindings at the tip and the feathers tight and secure, and the bronze point is dull with a patina of age, but still sharp enough to cut. You run your thumb along the edge of the point, feeling the faint bite of the metal, and then you slide the arrow back into the quiver and count the others with a slow touch of your fingertips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all present and accounted for. The counting is unnecessary, a habit that you perform without thinking, and it is comforting in its small completion, a tiny task achieved in a day of few tasks. You settle back against the parapet and let your hands rest in your lap, the palms upturned and the fingers slightly curled, and you feel the heat of the day pressing down on the lean-to roof, the reed matting above you creaking faintly as it expands in the sun. The air under the shade is still and heavy, but it is better than the direct light, and you are grateful for the small shelter, this simple construction of palm poles and woven reeds that some unknown soldier built long before you arrived. You think about that soldier, whoever he was, and you wonder if he stood on this same wall and watched the same empty desert and felt the same slow passage of the hours. The wondering is idle, a small ripple on the surface of your mind, and it fades as quickly as it came, leaving behind only the stillness. The spear lies on the brick beside you, and you pick it up and hold it across your knees, feeling the familiar weight of it. The crack near the base is still there, the same hairline fissure you noticed earlier, and you rub your thumb over it again, tracing its path along the grain. The wood is warm and dry, and you think that a little oil would do it good, a small ritual of maintenance that would fill a few minutes of the afternoon. You file the thought away and set the spear back down, and then you lean your head against the mudbrick and close your eyes for a moment. Just a moment, letting the darkness behind your lids soothe the slight ache that has begun to form behind your eyes from the glare. In the darkness, you listen to the sounds of the outpost, the distant creak of the well rope as someone draws water, the low murmur of voices from the courtyard below, the occasional snort of a donkey in its shaded corner. These sounds are so familiar that they have become a kind of silence themselves, a background hum that you no longer notice unless you specifically attend to it. You let them wash over you, and you feel your breathing slow and deepen, your chest rising and falling in a rhythm that matches the slow pulse of the afternoon. The heat wraps around you like a blanket, and for a fleeting moment you feel the pull of sleep, a gentle tug at the edges of your consciousness. But you do not succumb. You are on watch, and even in this quiet hour you remain alert in some small corner of your mind. You open your eyes, and the world is still there, unchanged. The shimmer over the desert has not diminished, and the sky is still that pale bleached blue, and the sun is still making its slow journey across the zenith. You stretch your arms above your head, feeling the muscles in your shoulders and back lengthen and release, and then you stand up, lifting the spear and the shield and settling them back into their familiar positions. The limestone seat is warm now from your body, and you step out of the lean-to and onto the open wall walk, blinking against the sudden brightness. The heat is a solid thing, a weight that presses on you from all sides, but you are used to it, and you take your place at the parapet with the same quiet acceptance you have brought to every watch. You rest the spear butt on the brick and let your eyes travel once more across the desert, the same scan you have done 100 times today, and will do 100 times more before the sun sets. The low ridge to the north, the scatter of dark stones to the south, the infinite dunes to the east, all of it exactly as it was, and exactly as it will be. A small breath of wind stirs from the east, a faint movement of air that carries no coolness, but does break the stillness, ruffling the edge of your headcloth, and stirring the dust on the parapet into tiny swirling eddies. The wind passes, and the stillness returns, and you settle into your posture, your weight balanced, your gaze steady, the afternoon stretching out before you like a long, slow road that leads nowhere in particular, but is pleasant enough to travel. You think about the meal you have just eaten, the bread and the fish and the onion, and how they are even now being turned into energy by your body, fueling the quiet endurance that the watch requires. You think about the quartermaster with his list, the captain with his quiet observations, the young soldier Ipoi, who brought the basket and who will come again at dusk with the evening meal. The outpost is a small machine made of routines, each person a part that moves in its appointed way, and you are content to be one of those parts, moving slowly through the hours without complaint or ambition. The desert before you is empty and eternal, and you are a single small figure standing against it, and that is enough. You take up the water skin that you refilled earlier from the bucket one of the young soldiers brought up, and you drink again, the water still cool from the well, and it tastes of the deep earth and the dark places where the sun never goes. You swallow and feel the coolness spread through your chest, a small blessing in the heat, and then you hang the skin back on its peg and return your hand to the spear. The afternoon watch has begun, and you are ready for it, as ready as you have ever been, which is to say, not ready in any dramatic sense, but simply present, simply here. A pair of eyes looking out over the empty sands, a quiet mind drifting on the slow current of the day. The afternoon arrives without announcement, a slow thickening of the light and a deepening of the silence, and you feel it settle over the outpost like a second layer of heat, heavier than the morning warmth and more patient. The sun has passed its zenith and now hangs slightly to the west, a white disk in a white sky, and the shadows that vanished at midday have begun to reappear, thin and tentative at first, stretching eastward from the base of the wall. You stand in the narrow band of shade provided by the reed lean-to, your spear still resting against your shoulder, your shield still hanging from your arm, and you let your gaze travel out across the desert, which has not changed since you last looked at it, which has not changed since you first looked at it many months ago. The sands lie in an enormous stillness that seems to hold its breath, a vast pale expanse that asks nothing of you, expects nothing from you, and offers nothing except its own quiet presence. You have learned to know this view as intimately as you know the lines on your own palms, and you let your eyes move across it now, with the slow familiarity of a habit worn smooth by repetition. To the north, the low ridge rises from the sand like the spine of some ancient animal buried long ago, its surface a darker brown than the surrounding dunes, weathered into smooth curves and shallow gullies that catch the afternoon light on one side while the other side remains in deep shadow. You have looked at that ridge so many times that you can trace its outline in your mind with your eyes closed. The way it begins as a gentle slope at the eastern end, builds to a rounded crest in the center, and then tapers off into a scatter of smaller hummocks of the western edge before merging back into the flat plain. Nothing ever moves on that ridge. No animal crosses it, no bird lands on it, no dust rises from its slopes. It is as fixed and permanent as the sky itself. To the south, the desert floor changes character, becoming harder and more rocky, with patches of dark gravel scattered across the pale sand like pepper on a grindstone. Individual stones stand out in the afternoon glare, their edges sharp and their shadows crisp, and you can see how the wind has sorted them over centuries, pushing the lighter sand away and leaving the heavier rocks behind. Some of the stones are dark and smooth, polished by wind-blown grit until they gleam faintly in the sun, and others are rough and pitted. Their surface is marked with tiny holes where softer minerals have been eaten away by time. You have sometimes thought about walking out to those stones, picking one up and feeling its weight in your hand, but you never have and you never will. They belong to the desert, and you belong to the wall, and the distance between you is not measured in steps, but in something larger. Directly ahead, to the east, the great sea of dunes rolls away into an unimaginable distance. Wave after wave of sand that crest and fall and crest again, their shapes so similar that your eyes lose track of where one dune ends and the next begins. The afternoon heat has made the distant dunes shimmer and waver, the same mirage effect that has been present since mid-morning, and the far horizon is now a trembling band of silver blue that seems to float above the sand, unattached to the earth. You let your gaze rest on that shimmer without trying to focus on it, and the effect is like looking at the surface of a shallow pond ruffled by a light breeze, a constant gentle motion that soothes the eyes and stills the mind. The dunes themselves are colored in shades of ochre and beige and pale gold, their eastern faces bright with reflected sun, their western faces deep in shadow that shifts from lavender to charcoal as your eyes move across them. The wind has sculpted their surfaces into delicate ripples that run in parallel lines from crest to base, patterns so precise they look as though they were drawn with a fine comb, and you can see how each ripple catches the light on its upper edge and holds a tiny line of shadow in its trough. You shift your weight from your right foot to your left, a small adjustment that your body makes without consulting your mind, and the spear shaft slides a fraction against your shoulder, the wood warm and smooth. The leather strap of the shield creaks softly, a tiny sound that is swallowed immediately by the larger silence, and you feel the sweat drying on your temples, leaving behind a faint tightness of salt that will wash away when you next splash water on your face. The afternoon heat is different from the morning heat. It is less sharp but more pervasive, a deep warmth that has soaked into the mud brick walls and the packed earth of the courtyard and radiates back at you from every surface, so that you feel it from above and below and all around, a gentle oven that cooks the world slowly and evenly. A dust devil spins into existence far out on the plain, a thin brown column that rises from the sand without warning, twisting and turning on itself as it moves across the desert floor. You watch it with the same calm attention you give to all the small events of the day, noting how it grows taller as it gathers strength, how the dust at its base swirls in a tight spiral while the upper portion stretches and thins, reaching toward the pale sky. It moves from north to south in a lazy, unpredictable path, wobbling slightly as it goes, and it makes no sound that reaches you, only the silent dance of dust and air. You watch it travel for perhaps a minute, a small column of motion in a world of stillness, and then it begins to falter, its base narrowing, its upper reaches dissipating into a faint haze, and then it collapses altogether, the dust settling back to the ground as if it had never risen. The place where it was is now indistinguishable from the sand around it, and you blink once, slowly, and the desert is as empty as it was before. Your mind, which has been drifting in the quiet, turns to the thought of how long you stood on this wall, how many days and weeks and months you have watched this same view without any change worth noting. You remember your first watch, the nervous energy that filled you then, the way your eyes darted from point to point looking for threats that never came, the way your hand gripped the spear too tightly and your shoulders ached from tension. You remember how the captain came and stood beside you, just as he did this morning, and told you in his low, rumbling voice that the desert was a patient teacher, but it would teach you to be still if you let it. You did not understand then what he meant, but you understand now. The desert has taught you to be still, not by doing anything, but by doing nothing, by presenting the same blank face day after day until your restless mind finally gave up and settled into the rhythm of the unchanging sands. The thought of all those months stretches backward in your memory, a long corridor of days that all look the same, each one beginning with the grey pre-dawn and ending with the cool darkness full of stars, and the sameness is not boring but strangely comforting, like a blanket settling over your shoulders on a cool evening. You realize that you no longer mark the passing of time by events, because there are no events. You mark it by the slow progression of the sun across the sky, the gradual shifting of the shadows, the small predictable sounds of the outpost that happen at the same hours every day. Your life has become a series of gentle repetitions, and you have come to love those repetitions in a quiet way, the way you love the feel of the spear shaft in your hand, and the taste of flatbread, and the sound of the well-rope creaking in the early morning. Each repetition is a small anchor that holds you in the present, and the present is all there is. A faint sound rises from the courtyard below, the soft scrape of a clay bowl being set on the ground, and then the murmur of voices, low and unhurried. You do not turn to look, but you listen with the part of your mind that always listens, and you identify the voices as belonging to the young soldier who brings the midday rations and one of the other men who has just come off watch. They are talking about something ordinary, the condition of a sandal strap or the way the water tasted slightly different this morning, and their words drift up to you in fragments that you do not try to assemble into meaning. The sound of their voices is enough, a gentle human noise that reminds you that you are not alone, even when you stand by yourself on the wall. The dust devil is gone, and the horizon is still, and you let your gaze travel again across the familiar shapes, the ridge and the stones and the dunes, each one exactly where it has always been. The ridge to the north has a small notch near its western end, a V-shaped gap where the rock has fractured and fallen away, and you can see how the afternoon light catches the edges of that notch, making it stand out against the darker shadow behind it. The stones to the south are as motionless as ever, and you notice that one of the larger stones has a patch of pale lichen growing on its northern face, a faint greenish-grey crust that is the only living thing visible in that direction. The dunes to the east have not moved, though you know that they do move, grain by grain, year by year, shifting in response to the wind that blows from the north in the winter and from the south in the summer. The movement is too slow to see, too slow even to imagine, and the dunes appear as permanent as mountains, as fixed and eternal as the stars that will come out tonight. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the heat on your eyelids, a warm orange glow that pulses gently with your heartbeat. Behind your closed eyes the desert remains, imprinted on your vision as a faint afterimage of pale gold and lavender shadow, and you let the image fade slowly into darkness. You listen to the silence, which is not truly silent but layered with tiny sounds that you have come to know as intimately as the view, the faint rustle of the reed matting on the lean-to roof, the soft creak of the well rope far below, the distant buzz of an insect that has taken shelter in a crack in the wall, the whisper of your own breath moving in and out of your lungs. These sounds are so constant and so soft that they become a kind of silence themselves, a background hum that you notice only when you deliberately attend to it. You open your eyes, and the desert is still there, unchanged, the same shapes in the same places under the same pale sky. The sun has moved a little further to the west, and the shadows have lengthened by the width of a finger, and the heat has not lessened, but has begun to feel less sharp. The first hint of the long, slow cooling that will continue through the late afternoon and into the evening. You know that in a few hours the sun will touch the rim of the western horizon, and the sky will fill with color, amber and rose, and deep lilac, and the desert will soften into something almost gentle, the harsh edges smoothed by the slanting light. But that is still some time away, and for now the afternoon holds its breath, suspended in a moment that seems to go on forever. You think again about the comfort of sameness, the way the unchanging view has become a kind of companion to you, a silent presence that asks for nothing and gives nothing but its own constancy. You remember the stories the older soldiers told when you first arrived, stories of battles fought long ago in the eastern lands, of enemies that came out of the desert with bronze weapons and fierce cries, and you remember how those stories made you feel, a mixture of fear and excitement that has long since faded into something softer. The enemies have not come in your time, and you have begun to believe that they will never come, that the desert will remain empty forever, that your watch will continue day after day until you are old and grey and the spear in your hand is worn thin by the years. This thought does not trouble you. It settles over you with the same calm weight as the afternoon heat, a quiet acceptance that feels as natural as breathing. The spear shaft in your hand has a small knot in the wood, a dark wall that you have touched so many times it has become smooth under your thumb, polished to a dull gleam that catches the light when you move your hand. You find yourself stroking that knot now, a tiny repetitive motion that you are barely aware of, and the sensation is soothing, a small anchor in the vast drift of the afternoon. You let your thumb trace the outline of the knot, round and round, and your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the motion, slow and steady, in and out, and the world outside the wall seems very far away, a dream that you are watching from a great distance. Another hour passes, or perhaps it is only a few minutes. The afternoon has its own measure of time, stretched thin and drawn out like a thread of honey pulled from a jar. The sun continues its slow descent, and the shadows grow longer, and the heat remains but begins to lose its edge, the air taking on a slightly softer quality that hints at the evening to come. A bird passes overhead, a dark silhouette against the pale sky, flying with slow, deliberate wing beats toward the north, and you watch it go until it is a speck, and then it is nothing, and the sky is empty again. The desert below is still a vast, pale stillness, the ridge still sleeping, the stones still scattered, the dunes still rolling eastward without end. And you are still standing on the wall, your spear at your side, your shield on your arm, your eyes on the horizon, and the unchanging sands stretch before you like a promise that will never be broken. A hand touches your shoulder, light and brief, and you turn from the parapet to find the soldier named Kenemet standing a pace away, his face as expressionless as your own. He does not speak, but his presence is enough. Your relief has arrived, and the afternoon watch is now his to keep. You lift your spear from the brick where it rested and hand it to him, the shaft passing from your grip to his with the ease of long practice, and then you unloop the shield from your forearm and pass that over as well, the leather strap still warm from your skin. Kenemet settles the shield onto his arm and leans the spear against his shoulder in a mirror of the posture you held moments ago, and he gives you a small nod that says everything necessary. You return the nod, and then you turn away from the desert and walk along the wall toward the steps, your feet finding the familiar path without any need for guidance. The steps down from the wall walk are the same, 15 packed earth stairs you climbed this morning, their edges rounded by the passage of countless sandals, their centers worn into shallow depressions that cup the foot as you descend. You take them one at a time, not hurrying, feeling the slight pull in your calves as you lower yourself from one step to the next, the motion a gentle stretch after the long hours of standing still. The air changes as you go down, losing the open dryness of the wall top and gaining a closer, earthier quality, the smell of mud brick and dust, and the faint tang of the donkeys in their corner. The courtyard opens around you as you step off the last stair, and you pause for a moment to let your eyes adjust to the deeper shade, the walls casting long shadows now that the sun has begun its slow descent toward the west. The courtyard is quiet at this hour, the younger soldiers having finished their midday chores and retreated to the barracks for their own rest, and the only figures visible are the donkeys standing motionless in their shaded corner, and the quartermaster sitting on a low stool near the storeroom door. You walk across the packed earth, your sandals making a soft brushing sound that seems loud in the stillness, and you head for the small work area set against the north wall, a space shaded by a length of linen stretched between two poles, where a rough wooden bench and a few clay jars hold the tools of equipment maintenance. This is your place during the rest periods, the spot where you tend to the small tasks that keep your gear in order, and you settle onto the bench with a quiet sigh, feeling the wood creak under your weight. You reach down and lift the leather sheath from where it hangs at your side, the bronze khopesh inside it, a familiar weight that you have carried since your first day at the outpost. The sheath is old, the leather darkened by years of handling and cracked in places along the seam, but it still holds the blade securely, and you draw the weapon out with a slow, steady pull, the bronze emerging into the dim light with a dull gleam. The khopesh is a curved sword, its blade shaped like a sickle but heavier, with a sharpened outer edge and a thick spine that gives it weight and strength. You lay it across your knees and examine it in the shade, noting the faint scratches on the bronze from the last sharpening and the tiny specks of green patina that have begun to form near the hilt, where moisture from your hand sometimes lingers. The blade does not need sharpening urgently, but you have time, and the ritual of the whetstone is a soothing one, so you reach for the small clay jar that holds the sharpening oil and the flat rectangular stone that rests beside it. The whetstone is a piece of fine-grained sandstone, dark grey and smooth on one side from long use, slightly rougher on the other where the coarser grit remains. You pour a few drops of linseed oil onto the smooth side, the liquid thick and amber and carrying a mild nutty scent, and you spread it across the surface with your fingertip, feeling the slight slickness as the oil fills the tiny pores of the stone. Then you take the khopesh in your right hand and set the blade against the stone at the proper angle, the edge just touching the oiled surface, and you begin to move the blade in slow circular strokes, the bronze whispering against the grit with a sound like water over sand. Each stroke covers a small section of the curved edge, and you work your way from the base of the blade near the hilt outward toward the tip, the motion rhythmic and unhurried, your wrist turning slightly to follow the curve. The oil darkens as it picks up tiny particles of bronze, turning from amber to a murky brown, and the smell of metal and oil mingles with the dry air of the courtyard, a clean, sharp scent that you have come to associate with quiet afternoons. You work on the blade for a long time, not because it needs it, but because the motion is calming, a small act of care that occupies your hands and frees your mind. The bronze begins to brighten under the stone's attention, the scratches fading and the edge taking on a faint silvery gleam that catches the light when you tilt it. You test the sharpness with the pad of your thumb, feeling the way the metal bites ever so slightly at the skin, and you are satisfied. You wipe the blade clean with a scrap of linen, removing the last traces of oil, and then you slide the khopesh back into its sheath, the leather gripping the blade with a soft resistance that speaks of a good fit. The whole process is used perhaps half an hour, and you feel a quiet satisfaction that is not pride, but simply the contentment of a task completed. You set the sword aside and turn your attention to your sandals, which have been whispering of a problem for the past several days. The left sandal has a leather thong that passes between your toes and around your ankle, and you have noticed that the thong has worn thin near the sole, the leather fibers fraying and stretching each time you walk. You lift your foot and examine the damage, running your finger along the thong where it emerges from the papyrus sole, and you see that the wear has gone deep enough that the thong could snap if left untended. A broken sandal on the wall would be a small annoyance. Nothing more, but there is no reason to allow it, so you reach for the bundle of leather scraps that the quartermaster keeps in a basket beneath the bench, offcuts from old straps and harnesses that have been saved for repairs. You select a strip of leather that matches the width of the original thong, a piece about as long as your forearm, dark brown and supple from being worked, and you set to work. First you unpick the old thong, using the point of a small bronze awl to loosen the knots that hold it in place, working carefully so as not to tear the papyrus. The knots come apart with a dry creaking sound, and the old thong slides free, leaving a clean hole through the sole. You discard the worn piece and thread the new strip through the hole from below, pulling it up until the ends are even, and then you pass the ends between your toes and around your ankle, adjusting the tension so that the sandal will fit snugly, but not too tight. You tie the ends in a neat knot at the side of your ankle, a knot you have tied so many times your fingers do it without instruction, and you test the fit by flexing your foot, feeling the new leather stretch slightly and settle into place. The sandal now feels secure and whole, the repair nearly invisible, and you lower your foot to the ground with a quiet sense of things being put right. There is still time before you must return to the wall, so you take up the spear that you handed off to Kenemet earlier, except that this is not the same spear. This is your own, the one you keep in the barracks for the watches when you are not on the wall. You had noticed a hairline crack near the base during the morning, And now you examine it again in the better light of the courtyard, turning the shaft in your hands so that the crack catches the shadow and becomes visible. It is a fine fissure running along the grain for the length of your little finger, not deep enough to weaken the shaft, but something that the dry desert air could worsen over time if left untreated. You reach for the small jar of linseed oil that you used on the whetstone, and you pour a small amount onto a clean rag, just enough to moisten the cloth without soaking it. Then you rub the oil into the cracked area, working it into the wood with slow circular motions, the oil darkening the pale acacia and sinking into the tiny crevice until the crack seems to close. The smell of the oil rises, clean and nutty, and you continue to rub until the wood feels smooth and slightly slippery under your fingers, the oil forming a protective layer that will keep the dry air at bay for another few weeks. You wipe away the excess with a dry corner of the rag and set the spear aside to let the oil soak in fully. Nearby, the quartermaster Hori is still at his stool, and you watch him without staring, your eyes drifting in his direction as your hands rest on the bench. He is a man of some 50 years, with shoulders rounded by a lifetime of lifting jars and a face that has been carved by the sun into a network of fine lines, and he is engaged in the same task he performs every afternoon, checking the stores against the list drawn on a large potsherd. The sherd is a piece of broken storage jar, its curved surface inscribed with a tally of items in the simplified writing the quartermaster uses, each entry a small pictogram for grain, water, oil, linen, leather, bronze, and a dozen other supplies. He holds the sherd in one hand and a pointed stick in the other, and he walks slowly from jar to jar, tapping each one with the stick and murmuring under his breath as he counts. You cannot hear the words clearly, only the low rumble of his voice, a sound that blends with the buzzing of a fly in the corner and the distant creak of the well rope. You watch as he pauses before the row of grain jars, tall vessels of reddish clay with wide mouths sealed with mud and straw. He counts them with his stick, touching each one in turn, and then he bends to check the seals, running his fingers around the edges to feel for cracks where weevils might enter. Satisfied, he moves on to the water jars, which stand against the north wall where the shade is deepest, and he uncorks one and peers inside, perhaps checking the level, before sealing it again and moving on. His progress is slow and methodical, the work of a man who has done this 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more, and you find the rhythm of it soothing. A small reminder that the outpost runs on such quiet attentions. Your attention returns to your own equipment, and you lift the shield from where it rests against the bench, the same cowhide shield you carried on the wall this morning. You examine the small crack in the wooden frame that you noticed earlier, the one near the upper corner where the hide has pulled away slightly, and you decide that it could benefit from a little attention. You take the rag with the linseed oil and rub a small amount into the wood around the crack, working the oil into the fibers so that they swell slightly and close the gap. Then you press the hide back into place and hold it there for a moment, feeling the leather's warmth under your palm. The repair is simple and probably unnecessary, but the act of doing it is pleasant, and when you set the shield down again, the corner looks tighter, the crack less visible. You then reach for the quiver that you keep beside the bench, the same leather cylinder you checked earlier in the day, and you draw out the arrows one by one, laying them across your knees in a neat row. There are 10 arrows, each with a reed shaft, a bronze point, and 3 feathers fletched with fine thread, and you inspect each one in turn, rolling the shaft between your fingers to check for straightness, testing the bindings at the point, and the feathers for tightness, running your thumb along the edge of each bronze tip to feel for dullness. The arrows are all in good condition, having been used only for practice in the courtyard and never in any real need, and you find no fault with any of them. You gather them together and slide them back into the quiver, the feathers rustling softly against the leather, and you set the quiver aside with the same quiet satisfaction that has attended each of your small tasks. The afternoon has grown later while you worked, the shadows in the courtyard deepening and stretching further across the packed earth, and the air has taken on a slightly cooler quality, the first subtle hint of the evening that is still some hours away. You stand up from the bench and stretch, raising your arms above your head and feeling the muscles in your back and shoulders lengthen after the time spent bent over your work. A cup of water would be welcome, so you walk to the water jar that stands in the shade of the north wall and lift the wooden dipper that floats on its surface, filling it and drinking slowly, the water cool and tasting of the deep earth. You drink the whole dipper and then pour a little water into your palm and splash it on your face, the moisture cutting through the salt and dust of the watch, and you dry your face with the edge of your headcloth, feeling refreshed. You return to the bench and gather your equipment, the khopesh in its sheath, the shield with its tightened corner, the spear with its oiled shaft, the sandals now secure on your feet. Everything is in order, and the knowledge settles over you like a calm blanket, the same feeling you get at the end of every equipment check, a sense of readiness that has no urgency behind it. The outpost is quiet around you, the quartermaster still murmuring his counts, the donkeys still motionless in their corner, the sky above the courtyard a pale washed blue that is just beginning to soften toward gold at the western edge. You know that soon you will climb the steps again and resume your place on the wall, facing the desert that never changes, but for now you are content to sit here in the shade with your gear around you, breathing the dry air and listening to the small sounds of the garrison at rest. The routines of maintenance are as much a part of your watch as the standing itself, and you move through them with the same slow patience, asking nothing of the world and receiving exactly what you need. You climb the steps back to the wall walk as the day begins its slow turn toward evening, the fierce white glare of afternoon softening into something gentler, as if the sun has grown tired of its own intensity and now wishes to rest. Your sandals make the same soft brushing sounds on the packed earth stairs that they have made 1,000 times before, and your hand on the mud brick wall feels the stored warmth of the day radiating back through your palm, a heat that is no longer harsh but deep and settled, like the embers of a fire that has burned down to its core. At the top you step onto the familiar platform and turn to face the west, where the sky is already beginning to change, the pale washed blue giving way at its lower edge to a band of the palest amber, so faint you might miss it if you were not looking. You are looking, and you have been looking for this moment all afternoon, carrying the expectation of it in the back of your mind, like a small smooth stone in your pocket. The soldier you are relieving, Kenemet, stands silhouetted against the brightening western sky, his figure dark and still, and as you approach he turns his head just enough to acknowledge you. The spear is handed over with the same wordless exchange of weight, the shield looped from his arm to yours, and then he is gone, his footsteps retreating along the wall and down the stairs, leaving you alone with the sunset and the desert, and the quiet that always seems deeper at this hour. You settle into your place, the spear butt resting on the brick, and the shaft leaning against your shoulder, the shield hanging easily from your forearm, and you let your gaze travel out across the sands that stretch away toward the setting sun. The view is the same as it has always been, the ridge to the north, and the stones to the south, and the dunes to the east. But now the light has transformed them, painting the sand in shades of honey and rose that deepen even as you watch. The sun itself has not yet touched the horizon, but it has descended far enough that its disk has begun to take on color, shifting from the blinding white of midday to a rich golden yellow that you can look at without squinting, a warm glow that spills across the desert like oil poured slowly from a jar. The dunes catch this light on their western faces, turning each crest into a line of pale fire, while the eastern slopes sink into shadows of lavender and indigo, the contrast so sharp that the landscape looks like a relief carved in wood, every ripple and hollow standing out with perfect clarity. The heat haze that shimmered all afternoon has faded away, and the air has become clear and still, so that the farthest dunes are as sharp as the nearest ones, their edges crisp against the glowing sky. You stand and watch, and the silence around you is so complete that you can hear the faint rush of your own blood in your ears, a distant ocean that has always been there just at the edge of perception. The shadows of the outpost walls stretch long across the sand below, spilling eastward like slow dark water, their edges sharp and precise near the base of the wall, but growing softer and more diffuse the further they extend. You watch them lengthen as the sun sinks, creeping across the desert floor with a motion that is too slow to see, but unmistakable when you look away and look back again. A silent tide that measures the passing of the minutes more accurately than any water clock. The shadow of the northeastern watchpost, where you stand, has merged with the shadow of the wall itself, and together they form a dark rectangle that lies across the pale sand like a blanket spread on the ground. Its edges beginning to blur as the light changes quality and the sky overhead deepens from amber to a soft rose that stains the entire western horizon. A coolness begins to rise from the desert floor, subtle at first, just a faint movement of air against your ankles and the exposed skin of your arms, but it grows as the minutes pass, a gentle current that carries away the stored heat of the day and replaces it with something fresher. You feel the sweat that dried on your temples earlier in the afternoon begin to cool, the salt tightening your skin, and you lift a hand and rub your forehead absently, feeling the slight roughness there. The air tastes different now too, losing the baked mineral flatness of midday and gaining a cleaner quality, as if the desert has exhaled and is now drawing in a new breath. A light breeze stirs from the west, just enough to move the edge of your headcloth and to carry with it the faint dry scent of the open sands, a smell like old paper and distant stone, and you turn your face into it, feeling it brush across your cheeks and the bridge of your nose, cool and kind. The sky continues its slow transformation, the rose deepening to a warm coral and then to a rich amber that seems to glow from within. The clouds that were invisible all day now appearing as thin streaks of gold and crimson high above the horizon, brushed across the blue like paint on a potter's wheel. You watch them as they drift slowly eastward, changing shape by imperceptible degrees, one wisp stretching and thinning until it is a thread of light, another breaking apart into smaller puffs that scatter and fade. The sun has now swelled slightly, an optical illusion that you've seen many times, its lower edge just beginning to kiss the rim of the world where the sand meets the sky in a clean line. The light it casts has softened further, losing its directness and becoming a diffuse golden glow that seems to come from everywhere at once, filling the air itself with a warm amber radiance that makes the whole world look kind and gentle and slightly unreal, as though you are standing inside a memory. Your body, which has held the tension of the watch all day without complaint, begins to relax now, the muscles in your shoulders and back loosening in response to the cooling air and the soothing light. You shift your weight and let the spear lean more heavily against your shoulder, the shaft a warm presence that has become so familiar you no longer notice it unless you deliberately think of it. Your shield arm hangs at your side, the leather strap soft and comfortable, and your free hand rests on the parapet, feeling the rough texture of the mud brick that has cooled slightly now that it is no longer in direct sun. You breathe in slowly, filling your lungs with the clean evening air, and you breathe out, and the exhalation is a soft sound that merges with the whisper of the breeze. A sound rises from the desert, far away to the south, a thin, high call that cuts through the silence like a needle through linen, and then fades, leaving a hole of quiet that slowly fills again. It is a jackal, a single animal greeting the approaching night with a cry that rises in pitch and then falls, a wavering note that seems to contain both loneliness and contentment, a sound that has echoed across these sands since long before the outpost was built and will echo long after it has crumbled back to earth. You listen without moving, your head tilted slightly, and the call does not come again, but its memory hangs in the air, a faint resonance that you can still feel in your chest. The desert has a way of absorbing sounds like that, swallowing them whole and leaving no trace, and you have learned to let them go as easily as they come without grasping or regretting. The temperature has dropped noticeably now, enough that you feel a slight chill on your forearms and the back of your neck where the headcloth does not cover. A chill that is not unpleasant, but reminds you that the night will be cool and that you should prepare for it. You turn from the parapet and walk the few steps to the small storage niche set into the wall near the lean-to, a shallow recess where extra supplies are kept, a water skin, a bundle of arrows, a small oil lamp, and a folded woolen cloak. You reach for the cloak and lift it out, the ball heavy and rough against your fingers, its fibers dense and slightly scratchy, and you shake it out once to release the folds that have settled during the day. The cloak is a simple rectangle of dark brown wool, unbleached and undyed except for two thin stripes of lighter brown near the hem, and it smells of sheep and wood smoke and the faint mustiness of long storage, smells that are as familiar to you as the scent of flatbread baking. You drape the cloak over your shoulders and settle it into place, pulling the edges forward, so that they cover your arms and hang down over your chest, the wool falling in heavy folds that trap the warmth of your body and keep the cooling air at bay. The fabric scratches against your skin at first, a sensation that is not exactly comfortable, but is also not unwelcome, a reminder of the physical world that grounds you in the present. After a moment, the wool warms from your body heat and softens, and the scratching fades into a steady weight that feels like a protective layer, a small barrier between you and the vastness of the desert night that is coming. You fasten the cloak loosely at your throat with a simple wooden pin, a smooth piece of acacia carved into a peg shape, and then you return to your place at the parapet, the cloak swirling around your sandals as you walk. The sun is now more than half below the horizon, its upper arc a brilliant dome of gold that seems to balance on the edge of the world, and the sky around it has exploded into color. The amber has given way to a deep crimson that bleeds upward into magenta and then into a soft violet, and higher still the blue of the day persists, but has darkened to a deep indigo in which the first faint stars are beginning to appear, tiny points of light that flicker and steady as you watch. You have seen this progression so many times that you could trace it in your sleep, the colors arriving in the same order every evening, and yet each time there is a small difference, a particular shade of pink that lingers longer than usual, a band of turquoise that appears briefly at the horizon and then fades, a wisp of cloud that catches the light at just the right angle to blaze like a brand pulled from a fire. Tonight there is a streak of cloud low on the horizon, thin and horizontal, that has turned a brilliant orange gold, so bright it almost hurts to look at, and you watch it as it slowly dims and reddens, the color draining out of it like water from a cracked jar until it is only a gray smear against the violet sky. The desert below has become a study in shadow and fading light, the dunes no longer distinct shapes but a single dark mass that rolls away into the east, its surface barely visible except where the last light catches a crest or a ripple. The shadows of the outpost walls have merged with the general darkness, and the sand at the base of the wall is now invisible, a black gulf that could be an arm's length deep or 1,000 cubits, there is no way to tell. The stones to the south have vanished entirely, swallowed by the dusk, and the ridge to the north is a dark silhouette against the fading glow, its outline sharp and jagged and utterly still. The world is shrinking as the light retreats, pulling back into the west, and you feel yourself shrinking with it, your awareness contracting to the small circle of the wall walk, the warmth of the cloak, the weight of the spear, and the last bright point of the sun as it makes its final descent. The moment arrives without ceremony. The sun's upper edge touches the horizon, lingers for a breath, and then slips beneath it, leaving behind a brilliant afterglow that spreads across the western sky like a slowly closing fan. The world goes quiet, quieter than it has been all day, as if the desert itself is holding its breath to mark the passage. The breeze dies, the last bird calls fade, and the silence becomes absolute, a deep pool of stillness that seems to have no bottom. You stand in this silence, your breathing slow and steady, and you watch the afterglow fade through its final sequence of colors, crimson to rose, rose to mauve, mauve to a pale lavender that thins and thins until it is only a memory of light at the horizon, a faint luminescence that might be the sky or might be your own tired eyes. Then even that is gone, and the west is a deep indigo that is almost but not quite black, a darkness that still holds a hint of the departed sun in its depths. The first true stars are out now, bright and steady, and you tilt your head back to look at them, the cloak shifting around your shoulders as you move. They are the same stars that have appeared every night of your life, arranged in patterns that the priests have named and catalogued, though you know only a few of their stories. There is the star that marks the north, fixed and unwavering, and there is the bright one that rises just after sunset and follows the moon across the sky, and there are the countless smaller stars that fill the spaces between, a dusting of light that grows thicker the longer you look. The Milky Way has not yet appeared, but you know it will come later, a great band of pale light stretching from horizon to horizon like the river of the night. For now the stars are individual points, each one a tiny spark that has traveled an unimaginable distance to reach your eyes, and you look at them without thinking, simply letting the light enter you and fill the quiet spaces of your mind. The evening has arrived, and with it the end of your day watch, though you will remain on the wall for a while longer until the night watch comes to relieve you. You pull the cloak tighter around your shoulders and settle back against the parapet, feeling the rough brick through the wool, and you let your gaze drift from the stars to the dark mass of the desert below, and then back to the fading glow in the west. The jackal has not called again, and the only sound is the whisper of your own breath and the soft creak of the wool as you shift your weight. The sun has set, the world has turned, and you are still here, a small figure wrapped in a brown cloak, standing on a mud brick wall in the middle of a vast and empty desert, watching the last light fade with a patience that has no end and no beginning, a calm presence in a calm world. Darkness arrives at the outpost not as a sudden curtain, but as a slow accumulation, a gathering of shadows that begins in the low places and gradually rises to meet the fading sky. You're back on the wall now, having climbed the steps after your rest period and the evening meal, and you stand at your post with the spear once again resting against your shoulder and the shield once again looped over your arm. The world around you is in the midst of its great daily transformation, the light withdrawing from the desert like a tide pulling back from a wide beach, and you watch it happen with the same quiet attention you have given to every phase of the day. The sun has already sunk below the western horizon, though you did not see it set from the wall, because you were in the courtyard when the final moment came, and now only the afterglow remains, a band of deep orange and rose that stretches along the edge of the world and fades upward into a soft lavender that deepens with each passing minute. The sand below the wall, which all afternoon was a blinding sheet of pale gold, has cooled to a muted beige, and the shadows that were sharp-edged and black have softened and merged together, filling the hollows between the dunes with a blue-grey darkness that seems to breathe and shift as the light continues to fail. The distant ridge to the north is no longer a distinct shape, but a dark silhouette against the brighter western sky, its outline smooth and featureless, and the scatter of stones to the south has vanished entirely, swallowed by the growing dimness. The desert is withdrawing into itself, pulling its details back into the anonymity of night, and you feel the temperature dropping by small increments, the heat of the day lifting away from the sand and rising into the air, leaving behind a coolness that is the first true relief since dawn. You adjust the woolen cloak that you fetched from the barracks before climbing back to the wall, pulling it closer around your shoulders. The fabric is heavy and slightly coarse, woven from the dark wool of the sheep that are raised in the delta, and it carries the faint smell of lanolin and wood smoke from the many evenings it has been worn beside the courtyard fire. It settles over your linen kilts and your bare arms with a scratchy warmth that is not entirely comfortable, but is deeply familiar, and you hold the edges together at your throat with one hand, while the other keeps its grip on the spear shaft. The headcloth is still in place, shading your neck, but now its purpose has shifted from blocking the sun to holding in the warmth of your body, and you are grateful for the extra layer. The sky above you is a steady in transition, the lavender deepening to violet and then to a dark blue that seems to go on forever, and as the light fades, the first stars begin to appear. They do not come out all at once, but one by one, tiny points of silver white that prick through the fabric of the sky in the places where the darkness is deepest. You watch the eastern sky, where the sun's afterglow has not yet reached, and you see a single star appear just above the horizon, a small steady light that seems to tremble slightly in the cooling air. Then another appears, slightly higher and to the north, and then a third, and then the stars begin to emerge in earnest, not in a rush, but in a slow deliberate sequence, as if each one is waiting for its moment. You let your gaze travel across the sky, and you see how the stars are scattered unevenly, some bright and close, others faint and far away, and how they form patterns that you have known since childhood, shapes that had been watched by soldiers on this wall for generations beyond counting. The band of the Milky Way begins to reveal itself as the darkness deepens, a broad river of light that stretches from the southern horizon to the northern, crossing the sky directly overhead like the pale reflection of a great celestial stream. It is not a solid band, but a congregation of countless tiny stars, so close together that their light merges into a soft glow, and you can see dark patches within it where clouds of dust block the light from the stars behind. The priests at the temple near your village used to say that the Milky Way was the heavenly counterpart of the Nile, a river of stars that mirrored the river of water, and that the souls of the dead sailed upon it in boats made of light. You do not know if that is true, but the image has stayed with you, and now as you look up at the great arc of the Milky Way, you can almost imagine the boats, small bright shapes moving slowly across the dark sea. The thought is gentle and distant, and it passes through your mind without leaving a mark, like a leaf floating on still water. Your eyes pick out the constellations that the priests named, the patterns that they said were the forms of gods and sacred animals, though to you they are simply arrangements of light, calm and unchanging. There is the hippopotamus, a large block of stars low in the northern sky, its shape more imagined than seen, but recognizable once you know where to look. The stars that make its back and head, and the small cluster that marks its eye. You remember the temple stories about the hippopotamus, how it was a creature of chaos that had to be subdued by the gods, and how its image was carved on amulets to ward off evil, but the memory is a faint one, and you let it go. Higher up near the zenith is the crocodile, a long winding line of stars that stretches from east to west, its jaws marked by two bright points and its tail trailing off into a scatter of fainter lights. You trace its length with your eyes, following the curve of its celestial body, and you think about the real crocodiles that basked on the mud banks of the river, their rough backs breaking the surface of the water, their mouths open to catch the warmth of the sun. The stars are very different from the animals, cold and silent and impossibly far away, but the names connect them to the world you know, and that connection is a small comfort in the vast darkness. To the south, just above the horizon, the great mooring post stands, a single bright star surrounded by a cluster of smaller ones, and it marks the place where the skyboat was tethered each night according to the old stories. The priests used to say that the mooring post held the sky in place, that without it the heavens would drift away and leave the earth in eternal darkness, and you remember standing in the temple courtyard as a child, looking up at the same star and feeling a shiver of awe that has long since faded into something softer. Now you look at the great mooring post with the calm gaze of familiarity, and it looks back at you with its steady silver light, asking nothing and promising nothing. The night grows darker still, and the stars multiply until the sky is thick with them, a field of light so dense that the dark spaces between them seem like an afterthought. You lean your head back and let your gaze wander across the entire dome of the sky, from the western horizon where the last faint trace of orange has vanished, to the eastern horizon where the stars are still appearing, layer upon layer, deeper and deeper. The air is cool now, truly cool, and when you breathe in you feel the chill in your nostrils and the back of your throat, a clean, sharp sensation that is the opposite of the heavy warmth of the afternoon. The wool cloak holds the heat of your body close, and you pull it a little tighter, feeling the rough fibers against your chin. The moon has not yet risen, and the desert below you is a landscape of shadows and silver, the dunes visible only as darker shapes against the faintly luminous sand. The starlight is bright enough that you can see the immediate area around the outpost, the flat stretch of sand directly below the wall, and the first gentle rise of the nearest dune. But beyond that, the details dissolve into a soft grey darkness that might be sand or might be empty air. There is no wind at all now, the breeze having died with the setting sun, and the silence is immense, a deep stillness that seems to press against your eardrums like water at the bottom of a well. You stand in that silence and let it wash over you. The only sounds the slow rhythm of your own breathing and the faint creak of the leather strap as your shield arm shifts. Behind you, on the inner side of the wall, a torch sputters softly in its bracket. It is a simple thing, a length of wood soaked in oil and wrapped with linen at the head, and it burns with a small orange flame that flickers and dances in the still air. The sound of it is barely audible, a low hiss and pop as the oil burns and the wood chars, But in the great silence of the desert night, it is the loudest thing you can hear. A tiny companion voice that murmurs beside you as you keep your watch. You do not turn to look at it. You know its light well enough, the way it casts a wavering glow on the mud brick behind you and sends your shadows stretching out across the parapet in front, a long, thin shape that moves slightly with each flicker of the flame. The torch will burn for another few hours before it needs to be replaced, and by then, the moon will have risen and the desert will be lit by a different kind of light. You think about the moon, which is still below the eastern horizon, a thin crescent that will rise late tonight and cast its faint silver on the dunes. You remember looking at the moon from this same wall on other nights, how its light was so pale it seemed to bleach the color from the sand, turning the desert into a landscape of bone white and charcoal shadow. The crescent moon does not give much light, nothing like the full moon that sometimes turns the desert into a place of sharp contrasts and eerie beauty. But it is enough to see by, enough to walk the wall without stumbling. You wait for it without impatience, knowing it will come in its own time, as it always does. Your mind drifts back to the stars, and you find yourself tracing the patterns again. Not the named constellations now, but simple shapes that you make up on the spot, a triangle here, a curved line there, a small cluster that looks like a bird with outstretched wings. You do this sometimes on the long night watches, letting your eyes play across the sky and your mind create order out of the random scatter, and it is a game that requires no effort and produces no result. A quiet way of passing the hours. The stars do not mind being arranged and rearranged. They continue to shine with their steady ancient light, indifferent to the eyes that watch them. A faint sound reaches you from the desert, so faint that at first you think it is only your imagination, a trick of the silence. But then it comes again, a thin, high call that rises and falls and then fades into nothing, and you recognize it as the voice of a jackal somewhere far out in the darkness, beyond the ridge to the north. The sound is lonely and a little mournful, a single note repeated twice and then silence, and it makes the desert seem suddenly larger, more empty, a place where small lives move unseen in the vast night. You listen for the sound to come again, but it does not, and the silence flows back in, deeper than before. The jackal has moved on, or it has fallen silent, and the desert holds its secret as it holds all secrets, close and still. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, the sandals making a soft scuff on the brick, and you feel the coolness of the night air on your face and hands. The skin of your cheeks is slightly tight from the dried sweat of the day, and you rub your free hand across your face, feeling the faint grit of salt and sand under your fingers. The sensation is grounding, a reminder of the physical world, and you let your hand fall back to your side and return your gaze to the eastern horizon, where the first pale glow of the moon is just beginning to show. It is a faint lightening at first, a subtle shift in the darkness that you might miss if you were not looking for it. And then it grows slowly, the sky above the horizon taking on a silvery tinge that deepens minute by minute. The stars in that part of the sky begin to fade, their light overwhelmed by the approaching brightness, and then the upper arc of the crescent moon appears, a thin curved sliver of white gold that seems impossibly delicate, like a pairing of fingernail held up against the dark. The moon rises with the same slow majesty it always has, clearing the horizon by degrees, and you watch it ascend until the entire crescent is visible, a perfect arc of light with the faint outline of the dark portion just visible against the starfield. Its light spills across the desert, pale and silver, and the dunes are transformed, their crests picking up a faint sheen that makes them look like waves frozen in mid-motion. The shadows of the dunes lengthen, the dark hollows deepening, and the whole landscape takes on a quality of softness and mystery, the harsh edges of the day smoothed away by the gentle illumination. You can see further now, the ridge to the north clearly outlined, the scatter of stones to the south visible as dark specks on the pale sand, and the desert floor stretching away to the east in a series of silver-grey undulations that seem to go on forever. The moon continues to climb, and its light grows stronger, though it is still only a thin crescent, nothing like the full moon that turns night almost into day. You let your eyes follow its path upward, and you notice how the stars near it are dimmed but not extinguished, still visible as faint points of light that surround the crescent like a scattered escort. The Milky Way remains bright overhead, the river of stars undiminished by the moon's presence, and the constellations hold their places, the hippopotamus and the crocodile and the great mooring post, all exactly where they were, unchanged and unchanging. The night sky is a map of permanence, a reminder that above the shifting sands and the passing days there is a world that does not move, and you find a deep comfort in that thought. You stand on the wall in the moonlight, the spear at your side, the cloak around your shoulders, the torch sputtering softly behind you, and you listen to the immense quiet that holds the desert in its palm. Your breathing is slow and steady, your heartbeat a gentle thud that you can feel in your chest and your temples, a rhythm that has been with you all day and will stay with you through the night. The desert is asleep around you. The outpost is asleep behind you, and you are the single waking point in a world of stillness, a pair of eyes looking out at the silver sands and the star-filled sky. You do not feel lonely. You feel held, supported by the silence and the darkness and the slow turning of the heavens, and you let the night wash over you with all its calm and all its mystery, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply present and at peace in the vast dreaming desert. The soldier who comes to relieve you arrives without sound, his sandals making no noise on the packed earth of the steps until he is nearly at the top, and then there is a soft scuff as he steps onto the walk and approaches through the moonlight. You know him as Ken, a man from the eastern Nome with broad shoulders and a quiet manner, and he carries his spear in one hand and a small clay lamp in the other, the flame of the lamp a tiny orange bud that flickers in the night air. He does not speak, and you do not speak. The exchange has been performed so many times that words are unnecessary. You hand him your spear, feeling the weight leave your hand and settle into his, and then you unloop the shield and pass it over, the leather strap still warm from your arm. Ken nods once, a small movement of his head that is barely visible in the dim light, and then he turns to face the desert, and you are free to go. You walk along the wall toward the steps, your legs stiff from the long hours of standing, and you feel the cool night air on your face and the back of your neck where the headcloth has slipped. The moon has climbed higher while you are watching the stars, and its thin crescent now hangs well above the eastern horizon, casting a pale silver wash over the outpost and the sands beyond. The torch that sputtered beside you on the wall is now behind you, and as you descend the stairs, the light fades, replaced by the softer illumination of the moon and the faint orange glow that rises from the courtyard below, a glow that you know comes from the embers of the communal fire. You take the steps one at a time, your hand resting lightly on the mud brick wall for balance, and with each step you feel the day's tension draining from your muscles, the slow release of a bowstring that has been held taut for too long. The courtyard opens before you as you step off the last stair, and the first thing you notice is the warmth, a gentle pocket of heated air that lingers near the ground where the fire has been burning all evening. The fire itself is a low bed of coals in the center of the courtyard, a circle of stones containing the remains of what was once a larger blaze, and the coals pulse with a deep orange-red light that breathes in a slow rhythm, brightening and dimming as the breeze passes over them. The smell of wood smoke hangs in the air, a rich scent that you have come to associate with the end of the day, and under it there is the earthier smell of the lentil stew that has been keeping warm in its pot at the edge of the fire. Your stomach stirs at the smell, a faint reminder that you last ate many hours ago, and you walk toward the fire with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who is tired but not exhausted, hungry but not ravenous. A clay pot rests among the embers, a wide-bellied vessel with a narrow mouth and two small handles at the sides, its surface blackened by many nights of sitting in the coals. The stew inside is thick and brown, made from lentils that have been simmered since the afternoon, and as you approach the fire, you can see the surface of the stew shivering slightly, a few lazy bubbles rising and breaking with a soft plopping sound. A wooden ladle stands in the pot, its handle protruding at an angle, and beside the pot, a stack of flat bread rounds has been left on a piece of clean linen, each round slightly darker on one side where it touched the oven wall. A small clay bowl and the cup rest on a flat stone nearby, waiting for you, and you lower yourself onto an upturned storage jar that serves as a seat. The clay cooled through your linen kilt, and you reach for the ladle. You dip the ladle into the stew, feeling the resistance of the thick liquid, and you pour a generous portion into the clay bowl, the lentils tumbling out in a soft mound that steams gently in the cool air. The smell rises to meet you, earthy and mild, with a hint of the garlic and salt that someone added earlier in the evening, and you set the ladle back in the pot and lift the bowl to your lap. The warmth seeps through the clay and into your palms, a gentle heat that spreads up your wrists and into your forearms, and you hold it there for a moment, simply feeling the comfort of it, before you reach for a piece of flat bread. The bread is no longer warm, but it is still soft, and you tear off a corner and dip it into the stew, the bread soaking up the brown liquid and softening further. You put the morsel in your mouth and chew slowly, the flavors blending together on your tongue, the nutty earthiness of the lentils, the faint saltiness of the broth, the mild sweetness of the bread. The food is simple and unremarkable, the same meal you've eaten on countless nights before, and it is exactly what you need. You eat without hurry, dipping each piece of bread into the stew and chewing it thoroughly before reaching for the next, your jaw working in a slow, steady rhythm that is almost meditative. The fire crackles softly in front of you, a sound that comes and goes as the embers shift and settle, and the thin column of smoke that rises from the coals catches the moonlight and turns silver before dispersing into the dark sky. Around you the outpost is quiet, the other soldiers either on watch or asleep in the barracks, and you have the courtyard to yourself, a small private space in the middle of the night. You tear off another piece of bread and dip it, and the stew has cooled just enough that it no longer steams, the temperature perfect for eating, warm but not hot, soothing to the throat as you swallow. A cup of beer stands on the flat stone beside the bowl, a simple clay cup with a rough, unglazed surface that feels gritty under your fingers. You lift it and hold it to your lips, and the smell of the beer is faintly sour and slightly sweet, the smell of barley that has been soaked and sprouted and fermented in the big jars that stand in the storeroom. You take a sip, and the liquid is barely fizzed, just a few small bubbles that tickle your tongue and then fade, leaving behind a mild taste that is more grain than alcohol, a drink that refreshes without intoxicating, a simple thirst quencher that the quartermaster brews fresh every few days. You swallow and feel the coolness of the beer wash the dust from your throat, the last remnants of the dry desert air that had settled there during the watch, and you take another sip before setting the cup down and returning to your stew. The fire holds your gaze as you eat, the coals a miniature landscape of orange and red and black, valleys of ash and peaks of glowing ember that shift and crumble as you watch. The heat from the fire warms your face and your hands, a gentle, radiant warmth that contrasts with the cool night air at your back, and you feel the two temperatures meeting on your skin, a pleasant balance of warm and cool that lulls your mind into a state of deep calm. You break off another piece of bread and drag it through the last of the stew, sopping up the remaining liquid, and then you lift the bowl to your lips and drink the final drops, the lentils soft and warm against your tongue. The meal is finished, and you set the bowl aside on the flat stone, the clay making a soft clink as it settles into place. You pick up the cup of beer and hold it in both hands, feeling the rough texture of the clay against your palms, and you take another sip, smaller this time, letting the liquid rest in your mouth before you swallow. The fire continues its slow dance, the embers glowing and fading in a rhythm that seems to match your own breathing, and you find yourself slipping into a state of quiet contentment, a feeling that is not happiness exactly, but something closer to peace, a deep acceptance of the moment and all the moments that have led to it. You think about the day that has passed, the grey pre-dawn and the golden sunrise and the heavy heat of midday, the slow afternoon and the amber sunset and the vast starry sky that you stood beneath for so long, and you realize that you are tired in a way that is entirely pleasant, a deep weariness that has settled into your bones and will carry you smoothly into sleep when the time comes. A sound breaks the silence, a soft sigh from across the courtyard, and you look up to see one of the other soldiers shifting on his sleeping mat in the shadow of the north wall. He is a man named Nabor, who sometimes talks in his sleep, though tonight he is silent, only rolling onto his side and pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders before settling back into stillness. You watch him for a moment, the slow rise and fall of his chest under the dark wool, and then you return your attention to the fire, which has not changed, and to your cup, which is still half full. The small disturbance fades into the general quiet, and you are alone again with the coals and the smoke and the vast silence of the desert night. You finish the beer slowly, taking small sips and letting each one linger, and when the cup is empty, you set it beside the bowl on the flat stone. You sit for a while longer on the upturned jar, not yet ready to rise, feeling the warmth of the fire on your skin and the weight of the cloak on your shoulders, and you watch the coals as they pulse and dim, their light growing softer as the fire burns down. The moon has moved further across the sky, and its crescent is now almost directly overhead, a slim arc of silver that seems close enough to touch, and the stars have shifted their positions as well, the great wheel of the sky turning silently above you. You tilt your head back and look up, and the Milky Way is still there, the river of stars that has watched over you all night, and you feel a small sense of kinship with it, a quiet understanding that passes between you and the sky without need for words. After a time, you become aware of the grit on your hands, the fine dust and salt that have accumulated over the long day, and you know that you should clean them before you go to the barracks. You rise from the jar, your legs a little stiff, and you walk to the edge of the courtyard where a pile of clean sand is kept for this purpose, a small mound of pale grains that the younger soldiers replenish each morning from the dunes outside the wall. You kneel beside the pile and scoop up a handful of sand, feeling its cool grittiness against your palms, and you rub your hands together slowly, working the sand over your skin and between your fingers, the tiny particles scrubbing away the salt and the oil and the faint residue of the stew. The sand makes a soft rasping sound, a whisper of friction that is the only noise in the courtyard, and when you are satisfied you brush your hands clean against each other, the remaining sand falling away in a fine shower that sparkles briefly in the firelight. You rise and walk across the courtyard to the latrine, a small enclosure built against the eastern wall, a simple structure of mud brick with a reed door that swings on leather hinges. The door creaks faintly as you push it open, and the smell inside is dry and earthy, the smell of sand and lime that the quartermaster sprinkles to keep the space clean. You complete your business with the same unhurried efficiency you bring to all tasks, and then you step out and close the door behind you, the reed brushing against the frame with a soft rustle. The night air feels cooler now, or perhaps it is only that you have been sitting near the fire for so long, and you pull your cloak tighter as you cross the courtyard toward the barracks. The barracks door is a wooden frame covered with stretched hide, and it stands slightly ajar, a dark gap that reveals nothing of the interior. You push it open gently, the hide stretching and creaking, and you step inside the long, narrow room where you woke so many hours ago, the same room with the low ceiling of palm logs and the packed earth floor worn smooth by the passage of many feet. The air inside is warmer than the air outside, holding the collective heat of the sleeping men, and it carries the familiar smell of wool and sweat and the faint tang of the oil lamp that burned earlier and has now been extinguished. The darkness is almost complete, broken only by the dim glow of moonlight that seeps through the high narrow window slit, a pale rectangle of silver on the opposite wall that provides just enough light for you to see the shapes of the other soldiers lying on their reed mats, their cloaks pulled up to their chins, their breathing a soft continuous murmur that fills the room like the sound of a distant sea. You find your own mat in the corner, the same mat you left this morning, its surface still bearing the faint impression of your body from the previous night. You kneel down and settle onto it, the reeds crackling softly under your weight, and you stretch out on your back with your head resting on the small roll of linen that serves as a pillow. The ceiling above you is a smear of dark shapes, the palm logs and the mud plaster and the underside of the thatch, and you have looked at it so many times that you know every crack and shadow by heart. You let your eyes trace the familiar patterns, the long, straight line of the central beam, the cross-hatching of the smaller logs, the dark patch where a leak once stained the mud during a rare rain, and the sight of it all is deeply soothing, a visual lullaby that has sent you to sleep on countless nights before. You pull the cloak up to your chin and settle your arms at your sides, feeling the warmth of your body slowly filling the space inside the wool, and you listen to the breathing of the men around you, steady and soft, a rhythm that rises and falls in a slow tide. Someone murmurs in his sleep, a wordless sound that comes and goes, and then there is silence again, except for the breathing and the faint creak of the roof as it cools in the night air. You close your eyes and the darkness behind your lids is a warm red-brown, the afterimage of the fire still glowing faintly, and you feel the day's events receding from your mind, the watch and the meals and the equipment and the sunset, all of it fading into a gentle haze that asks nothing of you and expects nothing from you. You think briefly of the next day, knowing it will be much like this one, the same wall and the same sands and the same slow arc of the sun, and the thought is not a burden but a comfort, a promise of more quiet hours, more simple meals, more nights beneath the stars. You hold that thought for a moment, and then you let it go, and you let yourself drift, your breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the sleeping men around you, your body sinking into the reed mat as the desert night wraps its silence around the outpost and holds it gently until the dawn. You lie down on your reed mat in the dark, the same mat that has received your body every night for more months than you care to count, its surface woven from dried river grass that crackles softly when you shift your weight and settles into silence when you are still. The ceiling above you is a smear of black made of palm logs laid side by side and packed over with mud plaster, a surface you have studied so many times that you could trace its every line with your eyes closed. A faint rectangle of moonlight falls through the high narrow window slit and rests on the opposite wall, a pale silver shape that does not flicker or waver, steady as a pool of water on a windless night, and it provides just enough illumination for you to see the outlines of the other soldiers lying on their own mats in the long low room. The air inside the barracks is warm and close, holding the collective breath of 12 sleeping men, a gentle humidity that smells of wool and sweat, and the faint, clean tang of the linseed oil someone used earlier to treat a leather strap. You breathe it in, and it is as familiar to you as the scent of your own skin. Around you, the breathing of the men rises and falls in a slow, shared rhythm, each sleeper following his own pace, but all of them blending together into a soft, continuous murmur that fills the room like the sound of a distant sea heard from behind a dune. You can pick out individual breaths if you listen carefully, the deeper, slower rhythm of the captain who sleeps near the door, the lighter, quicker breaths of the youngest soldier who has not yet learned to sleep through the small sounds of the night, the occasional sigh from someone turning over on his mat, and then settling back into stillness. These sounds have become a kind of music to you, a lullaby woven from the quiet presence of other lives, and you let them wash over you without trying to separate them or name them, receiving them as you might receive the sound of wind in palm fronds or water lapping against the riverbank. The room is dark and warm and full of breathing, and you are part of it, a single thread in the fabric of the sleeping outpost. You stretch your legs out on the mat and feel the slight unevenness of the packed earth floor beneath the reeds, a gentle contour that your body knows so well it has become part of your own shape. The mat is just long enough to support you from your heels to your shoulders, and your head rests on a small roll of folded linen that you have used as a pillow since your first night in this place. The linen is soft from many washings and carries a faint smell of the courtyard, sun and dust, and the lingering trace of the water jar, and you turn your head slightly to find the exact position that eases the tension in your neck, the position you find every night without thinking. Your arms lie at your sides, the hands open and relaxed, the fingers slightly curled, and the woolen cloak that you wore on the wall is now pulled up to your chin, its rough warmth enclosing your shoulders and chest. The cloak is heavy in a comforting way, a weight that anchors you to the mat and reminds your body that it is time to rest. A faint breeze slips through the window slit and moves across the room, barely strong enough to stir the air, and you feel it brush against your forehead and the bridge of your nose, a cool touch that is gone almost before you notice it. The moonlight on the wall does not move, and the breathing continues, and the breeze becomes a memory, and you close your eyes, letting the darkness behind your lids replace the darkness of the room. The world shrinks to the sounds and the sensations of your own body, the slow rise and fall of your chest, the soft thud of your heart that you can feel in your temples and your wrists, the slight ache in your lower back that is not pain, but simply the echo of the long hours you spent standing on the wall. You acknowledge these sensations one by one, and then let them go, releasing them into the quiet like small stones dropped into deep water. Your mind, which has been busy all day with the small tasks of the watch, begins to slow now, the thoughts circling more and more gently, like a bird coming to rest after a long flight. You think about the day that has just ended, the grey pre-dawn and the golden sunrise, the heavy heat of midday, the long, slow afternoon, the amber sunset and the vast starry sky that you stood beneath for so many hours. Each memory is soft and blurred at the edges, lacking any sharp detail, and they drift through your consciousness in no particular order, mingling with each other until you can no longer separate the morning from the afternoon or the afternoon from the evening. The day has become a single continuous stretch of time, a calm river that you floated down without effort, and now you have reached the still pool at its end, the place where the current slows and the water grows deep and dark and peaceful. You think about the next day, knowing before you even form the thought what it will bring: the same wall, the same sands, the same slow arc of the sun, the same flat bread and dried fish and lentil stew, the same faces of the men you have come to know without ever really speaking to them. The quartermaster will walk his circuit and tap his tally shirt. The captain will pause on the wall and speak in his low rumbling voice. The young soldiers will draw water from the well and sweep the courtyard and bring the meal baskets up the steps. The lizards will scuttle across the parapet. The dust devils will spin and die on the horizon. The stars will come out one by one in the deepening dark, and you will stand on the wall and watch it all with the same quiet patience you have brought to every watch. This certainty is not monotonous to you. It is a kind of promise, a gentle assurance that the world will continue in its orderly way, that nothing will be asked of you beyond what you have already given, that you will spend another day in the calm embrace of the outpost and the desert. The thought settles over you like another blanket, warm and heavy, and you feel something inside your chest unwind, a small knot of tension that you did not know you were carrying until it loosened and dissolved. You turn onto your side, the reeds crackling once, a brief dry sound that is swallowed immediately by the darkness, and you draw your knees up slightly and rest one hand under the linen roll beneath your head. The wool cloak shifts with you, settling into new folds, and you feel the fabric brush against your chin and your jaw, a soft scratch that is not unpleasant, but simply there, a familiar texture that has been part of your nights for as long as you can remember. The breathing of the other soldiers continues, steady and soft, and you let your own breathing match its rhythm, in and out, slow and deep, feeling the air fill your lungs and then leave them. Each exhalation a small release of the day's remaining weight. The room is so quiet now that you can hear the faint creak of the palm logs overhead, a sound so subtle it might be only your imagination, the timbers settling as the night air cools them, contracting by infinitesimal degrees. You listen to that sound, and it is like the voice of the outpost itself, a low murmur that speaks of age and permanence, and the slow passage of countless nights just like this one. Your thoughts drift further, losing their coherence, becoming fragments of images and sensations rather than complete ideas. You see the face of the lizard that watched you from the parapet, its dark eye unblinking, and then the image fades into the shimmer of the heat haze over the dunes, that trembling silver-blue mirage that looked so much like water. You feel the warmth of the spear shaft in your hand, the smooth wood polished by time and touch, and then that fades too, replaced by the taste of the lentil stew, mild and earthy, and the faint sour sweetness of the beer that washed it down. These fragments come and go without any connection, a gentle cascade of memories that ask nothing of you, and you let them pass, neither holding on to them,